And we are going to do just a little recap from where we left off. We are so close to the end of Unit 6. So we just kind of want to refresh, and we end the important part of this section talking about the responsibility of the broker. So again, you guys have seen this before, okay? This particular information that you're looking at right now, I think all of you should make yourselves a note. If you haven't already, you guys need to read, like actually sit down and read pages 126 to 127. Do you guys see at the bottom of page 126, it says responsibilities of the real estate broker? Do you think that's kind of important? Everybody, please shake your head yes. So if you haven't looked that over, and that's what we're recapping here. Remember we said 6 is the first time that we bring the agents and the agents' responsibilities, I think, into the class. This is our first unit. So we need to know what those responsibilities are. So brokers have a duty. Again, this is all a recap, just to refresh us real quick. Kind of sum up Unit 6. Brokers have a duty to review land use control before we list the property. So as we mentioned the other day, there's a lot of information. There's a lot that has to happen to a listing before you ever see it online. And the listing agent's got to do some research, and they got to learn some information about the property. And one of the things they have to learn is the land use control. If you have a buyer with a particular need, like I want to run a home daycare out of my home, then you need to help them check land use controls and make sure that it's allowed. We need to verify that the buyer consumers end use will be allowed. Again, you guys, so simple. If it's important to my buyer, then it's important to me. Y'all don't look at your buyers and say, why are you worried about that? We're not going to worry. If it's important enough for them to bring it up to you, then it becomes important to you. Everybody with me? So their end use, however they want to use the property. And guys, remember, we are not attorneys. Y'all start practicing reminding yourself of that. I am not an attorney. And there's certain things that we cannot do. And one thing we cannot do is interpret land use controls. Please remember, we are fact finders. I help the consumer get the information, but I cannot interpret it for them. Again, just recapping, we need to be able to advise all consumers of any covenants or ordinances, anything that could affect their use and enjoyment of the property. Again, whatever their end use is, and making sure that it can be used. I mean, could y'all imagine spending $200,000 on a piece of property and then find out you can't use it for what you intended to? Would you be upset? Yeah. So, you know, kind of help sometimes to put yourselves in your buyer's shoes. So we help them with that. The broker needs to advise the consumer if the property is subject to any HOA dues and assessments. Again, you guys, monthly HOA dues, for example, the lender is going to take that into consideration when we're looking for loan approval. Now, we're going to talk about loan approval in units 14 and 15. But if your buyer is looking for property at the tippy top of their range, they don't have much wiggle room for allowable monthly payment. And you throw in something like an expensive HOA, that could set them over their allowable limit. We're not going to get loan approval. So this information is usually available to us in MLS. We'll talk about the multiple listing services in Unit 8, but we can kind of help our buyer. But we need to let them know you're going to have to, if you live here, you're going to have to pay HOA dues. You may have to pay special assessments if they want to do any renovations to the property. We need to advise consumers that they need to review the covenants. They need to review any owners associations documents. I'm going to say most of these can be found online. Can I help my buyer get this information? Can I help my buyer get this stuff in their hands? Of course I can, because I'm a fact finder. So if there are HOA documents, if there is information, let's try to get it to our buyers so they can review it. Again, especially if they have a special need. For example, if your buyer says, we want to put a fence up, maybe not any fence, maybe specifically a chain link fence. You may have an HOA that says you can put a fence up, but it's got to be certain materials. Chain link is not allowed, right? So they're all different. That's my point, and that's what I need you guys to hear. All those covenants are different. Just because you saw one covenant doesn't mean nothing for the next HOA, right? They're all different. So we're going to help them get those covenants in their hands so they can review them before they sign. And then that was where we ended. So the last thing I just wanted to say, we as brokers, and this kind of gets us into where we're going in Unit 7, we as brokers need to constantly be looking out for red flags. If something throws a red flag at you, that should trigger you to investigate. That should trigger you to ask questions. That should trigger you to dig a little deeper. So if something doesn't look, or questions on zoning or covenants, highways, schools, we'll talk a little bit about schools. All those things are important to a buyer before they purchase make that big purchase price. So now that we've kind of started to introduce you guys to the broker's responsibility, we're getting ready to blow through Unit 20 real quick and talk a little bit about our responsibility. But remember the other day I said after 20, we're going to get into Unit 7. And Unit 7 is when we start getting into the good stuff. And the good stuff is defining me as an agent and what my role is and what my responsibility. And one thing we're going to start talking a lot about are looking out for these red flags and paying attention to them. Don't ignore them when we come across them. The very last piece, I told you we were so close to finishing. The very last piece of Unit 6 is just a brief mention about government-owned land. It's estimated that the government owns about 30% of the continental United States. So there's some land, about 30%, that's protected by the government. They could use that, as you can see here, for some of their municipality buildings, military stations, our national and state parks. So the rest of the 70% is what we can sell, right? That's the privately owned. But there's some that we just won't be able to touch. What does it mean when it said sometimes the government owned up to 80% of the land? It could be a certain, are you on page, I guess you're on page 127. It could just be talking about a certain area. Nope, I'm not in Unit 20 yet. We're still finishing up Unit 6. I'm on page 127. I mean, guys, the government can do what the government wants to do, right? So if they want the land, remember we talked about eminent domain. If they want the land, and that gets us through Unit 6. I told you we were close. Truth be told, I was trying really hard to get through it on Tuesday, on Tuesday, and I just didn't. So, chill out, Julie. I took 10 minutes and knocked it out today, and now we're good. So those key terms in Unit 6 are back on page 109. That key point review, y'all, I like the key point review. Have you guys started looking at these key point reviews? Aren't they a nice little summary of the whole unit? I mean, there's some intimidating information in here, yes? And we haven't even gotten to the meat of it yet. But I like the key point review. I'm not suggesting you use the key point review as a substitute for reading the unit. I still need you guys reading the unit, but it's just that. It's a very nice review. And then you got that student quiz for Unit 6. Okay. Everybody good? All right. I need to stop sharing this for 1 second. So y'all bear with me. I got to switch out my PowerPoints. I don't know why, but Zoom can, man, it's got some quirks. Let's just leave it at that. And for some reason on my device, Zoom will only let me have one PowerPoint up at a time. It doesn't like to. So while I'm getting myself set up, you guys can start finding Unit 20. And that starts on page 498. 498. Good morning. Unit 20. Unit 20 is interesting. Did y'all look ahead at Unit 20? Unit 20 will make you terrified to breathe the air that you breathe, won't it? If you looked ahead, you know what I speak of. Did it make you a little nervous? The stuff is out there. So Unit 20 is our environmental issues. And in this unit, we're going to talk about just some basic environmental issues and what our responsibility is with this. So again, at the end, we're going to bring the broker into it. Before we begin, let's look at the picture on page 499. Now, the environmental issues that we're getting ready to discuss, they're showing us on page 499 where we may find them in a property. I've never known of a single property that has every single environmental issue. So please understand, this picture's a little extreme, right? If I were your agent and you wanted to buy this house, I would advise you against from doing that, right? I would please beg you to reconsider. So I don't want you guys to think you're ever going to have to worry about walking in the front door and finding everything, but this just kind of gives you an idea of what you may find where, okay? Wear a mask if you go in that house, or like two. All right, so environmental issues. Environmental issues are growing in importance in real estate transactions. Why? Because environmental issues are health issues. Health issues are people issues. You know who we deal with in real estate? People. So it's important to us because our people are buying homes, properties with these environmental issues. We're going to start introducing this word to you of disclosure. And that, as we'll learn at the end of the unit, is our biggest responsibility, is to disclose what we know. So once we learn of an environmental issue, I am not expected to discover all environmental issues. I do need to look out for red flags. If I see something that throws up a red flag, I need to investigate it. I need to ask questions. I need to encourage my buyer or seller to dig a little deeper, to find a little bit more. That's my big responsibility. There's some foreshadowing to the end of this unit. That's my big responsibility with environmental issues, is paying attention when a red flag goes up. Most, if not all, environmental issues, a great place to start is the EPA's website. The EPA is our Environmental Protection Agency. Now, I would ask that you guys wait until after class before you go check this out, but you can just, after class, go to Google, type in EPA and take to their website, and there's a plethora of information in there. And anytime you have a buyer or a seller asking about environmental issues, then you may want to consider sending them or going with them to this website so you guys can, investigate together. So what we're going to do now is, man, this gets scary, y'all. We're going to talk about specifically about some of these environmental issues. There's some crazy stuff out there. First up, we got asbestos. We don't use asbestos in building products anymore. That's the good news. We once used it as an insulation. We could wrap it around our pipes and it helped with heat. It helped with fire resistance. Asbestos was banned from building materials in 1978. Now, you don't necessarily need to know that date for this. But with asbestos, here's the deal. If the home was built after 1978, you probably don't have to worry about it. If it was built prior to 1978 and your buyer wants to do major renovations or major construction, then we may have to worry about asbestos. As long as asbestos is intact, it's just fine. There's no problem. The problem with asbestos is when it becomes friable. So when it becomes friable, it starts to break down. And that's what we're looking at in our picture here. You see how this is like hanging and falling down? As this is becoming friable, there's little particles from this that get into the air. We breathe the air, the particles get in our lungs, and now we have an issue with asbestos. There are experts, not you and I, but there are experts that can handle asbestos, friable asbestos. Removal could be an option. The problem with removing it, though, is you're going to break it up and you're going to make it friable as you're trying to take it out of the property, right? So it might be that encapsulation, kind of sealing it, wrapping it back up. Again, let the experts handle that. Let me say this too, just, you know, sometimes when we start using a new building material, it may take 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years before we realize it's bad for us. So a lot of these things we're going to talk about we used to use, but we don't anymore because we didn't know at first they were bad. As soon as we learned they were bad or harmful, we stopped using them. And not to make anybody nervous, but what building materials are we using today that we don't know yet what the long-term effect? You guys see what I'm saying? Sometimes it just takes time to see what those effects are, and asbestos was one of them. And as soon as we realized it was bad, we said, right, we're going to ban it. We're not going to use it anymore. Something else that we used to use that we've banned and we don't use anymore is lead in paint, for example. You guys may have heard of lead-based paint. Lead can also come in lead pipes or solder. Solder is the agent that connects two metals. So if you're trying to connect two metal pipes, for example, you would solder them. You do need to know 1978 when it comes to lead. Lead was banned in residential property in 1978. You need to know that date. Write it down really big. When it comes to lead, you need to know. The reason we used to use lead-based paint is because it had a drying agent in it that would allow the paint to dry faster. Usually with the lead-based paint, where you find it in anything built prior to 1978 is going to be around windowsills or door frames. The problem with lead, it could cause damage to developing organs. So who suffers from lead poisoning is primarily children. And that does include, that's right, and that does include pregnant women. This is the concern. It's those developing bodies, those developing organs. The EPA has provided this booklet that you're looking at, Protect Your Family from Lead in Your Home. And its intent is to help educate the consumer about lead and the possible dangers and the possible risks. You can purchase the booklet. You can be frugal like me and go download the free PDF, right? But we want to make sure we get this in our consumers' hands to help educate them. And I need you guys to understand, just because the home was built prior to 1978 is in no way a guarantee that it has lead in it. Because the home is built in 1978, it may have lead in it. Y'all don't make promises or guarantees. Little flag goes up. You're listing a property that was built in 1963. Flag goes up. We have the conversation about potential lead in the home. The only way to know for sure is to have it tested. And how they test it, they actually have to scrape off, go to the windowsill or to the door frame and scrape off some of the paint and send it into a lab. Your buyer or tenant may choose to have that tested before they occupy. But again, if, you know, I can't tell them that's what they want to do. They have that option. The booklet talks all about Everything you ever want to know about lead is in this booklet. We have numerous of forms that we haven't even talked about yet. So this is our first form. And our first form, and we're going to look at this together in just a minute, but our first form is a lead-based paint or lead-based paint hazard addendum. When you guys see addendum, an addendum, I want you to see the word add. An addendum adds to and becomes part of the sales contract. So if the home was built prior to 1978, our sales contract in our leases will include this lead-based paint or lead-based paint hazard addendum. Again, please understand, this addendum does not say, well, if it was built in 1963, it's got lead in it. What this addendum says is, because it was built in 1963, it may have lead in it. Sellers or owners of properties must disclose any known presence of lead in the home. Now we're going to talk about seller disclosures and their responsibilities as we get into Unit 7. And one thing we're going to learn is this is the kind of the exception to the rule. This is about the only thing that homeowners have to disclose if they know of lead. If they ever had contracted work done, they hired contractors, painters, they would have had it tested. That's part of the responsibility of the licensed contractor. If they were do-it-yourselfers though, and they painted themselves, they may not have had it tested. I can only disclose, the seller can only disclose what they know. So if they've never had it tested, they don't know. When it comes to lead-based paint, they talk about target housing. Target housing is anything that was constructed prior to 1978. So what home may be affected by lead? Anything built prior to 1978. There are a couple exceptions. They may have lead in them, but they're not as worried about them. An example of an exception could be a housing for elderly. Remember, lead doesn't affect organs once they're developed. It only affects developing organs. So if you have like a nursing home or something, and they want to paint, they're probably not going to have it tested. Another exception to target housing would be 0-bedroom dwelling. What do I mean by that? We live, sleep, everything in one room. Think studio apartments, dorm rooms, military barracks, 0-bedroom dwelling. We have something called the North Carolina Lead-Based Paint Hazard Management Program. If you are performing renovations, repairs, or paintings for compensation, again, talking about our licensed contractors, our licensed painters, for example, then they need to be certified in how to handle lead. They know how to have it tested, what to do, all that other good stuff. Like I said, you guys, do-it-yourselfers are exempt because they're not, one, they're not doing it for compensation, but two, they're generally not. Well, that makes me really sad, John. You think that's true? That makes me very sad. So what happens if they don't do it and they get caught? Well, they could be looking at fines. That says $750 per day. Can that add up pretty quickly? And then the EPA can get involved as well. So, gee, Julie, what's the big deal? Money, yo. These are some healthy fines. $32,500 per day. Remember, okay, let me ask you guys again. I asked you on day one. Hold your hand up proud. Where are my HGTV fans? Come on, where are you? You can't turn it off. I know some of you are out there. Y'all know your friends Chip and Joanna? They got themselves in trouble a couple years ago because of a violation of lead-based paint. And while I never celebrate anybody getting caught, get in trouble, I did think that that was important, because even though it's a reality show, they're still dealing with real life things, such as lead, asbestos, that kind of thing. When it comes to lead, what's our responsibility? Well, we have to disclose the presence of any known lead-based paint in the home. How do I know? Again, this is one of the disclosures that the seller must make. So if the seller knows, they need to disclose that. You and I have a duty to disclose that to potential consumers. And then we need to make sure that the owner is in compliance. Have questions. Have you had this, licensed contractor? Do you know of any, have any reports or records of lead in the home? And then we need to make sure that the owner completes that lead-based paint addendum. Again, when we get to the end of this unit, we're going to jump in Learn, Test, Pass, and we will check out that addendum. Our first form, our first of many, just to give you a heads up. Another environmental concern out there is radon. Radon is the result of decaying materials in the ground. So as materials get buried, as they decay, they release gases. And gases look for places to escape out into the atmosphere. And if the gases find a place to escape under your home, then the home could be subject to high levels of radon. Radon also affects respiratory. The problem with radon is it's clear, it's odorless, it's tasteless. The only way you know that you have radon in your home is to have it tested. Radon's everywhere. And guys, it's not like one area can have a concentration of radon. It could vary from neighbor to neighbor, because again, these gases are just looking for anywhere to go. So you may have one neighbor with a low radon level, you may have another neighbor next door with a very high. So just because your neighbor tests low doesn't mean anything for you. The EPA tells us that 4.0 picocuries or higher is considered undesirable. Anything under 4.0 is okay. Again, it's everywhere. We're probably breathing a little bit of it right now. I hope the concern, though, is when it gets over 4.0 picocuries. And how we, well, radon, ventilation helps. So, like, for example, a vacant home may have a higher radon level than if the home were occupied. Homes were meant to breathe. They were meant for people to come and go, doors and windows to open, the AC to kick on every once in a while. That's how a home breathes, and that aids in the ventilation. Now, I'm not saying just because it's occupied, you couldn't have high levels of radon. But I'm saying vacant homes where people don't come and go daily, they could have a higher concentration. A lot of our new construction could have higher levels of radon because we're building homes so tightly sealed these days, right? We don't want any draft. Some builders are starting to include radon mitigation systems in their new construction when they build. They're tackling it before it ever happens. So how we fix radon? We got to pull that radon gas out of the home. And what you're looking at here, you guys see this pipe coming up the side of the house? This pipe drills into this crawl space here. And there's a bunch of little fans in this pipe. So it drills into the crawl space. It pulls the air out of the crawl space, up the pipes on the side of the house, and then blows it up in the atmosphere where it belongs. This radon mitigation system, this is how we're going to remediate high levels of radon. just a word of caution. These little fans that pull the air don't last forever. So if you have a radon mitigation system in your home, for example, which I bet you some of you do, you may want to have these fans or check your radon level every, 5 to 10 years. And when you're showing a property with one of these systems in place, I would still have this conversation with my buyers, because again, those little fans don't last forever. I actually had this happen. I was helping buyers purchase, and we were looking at the property. We were down in the basement and we saw the radon mitigation system, and we had a conversation. They said, "What's that?" And I said, "Oh, that's radon. This is how, da, da, da." We had a conversation about it, pointed it and everything. We went under contract. They started doing their inspections, which I will talk about. We will get there. And one test they decided to do was a radon test. How we do a radon test? In a lot of cases, the home inspectors are certified to do this. So they set up this little contraction in the home, and every hour it takes a snapshot of the radon level. And after about 2 or 3 days, it gives us an average. And if that average is more than 4.0 picocuries, then we got to get it fixed. So my buyers, we go under contract, they decide to have the radon tested, and it came back at like 7 point something, 8 point something. I really don't remember, but it came back over 4.0. So I called the listing agent. The listing agent called their sellers. The sellers called their radon guy. The dude came out, and come to find out, those little fans weren't working. Those little fans had stopped working. So that was a lesson for me to, just because you see one is no guarantee that it has low radon. Just because you may have one in your home is no guarantee. It doesn't hurt to have it tested. It is, to my understanding, that like Lowe's and Home Depot have do-it-yourself tests. I don't know how accurate those are. I haven't really had much experience with those. So, great question, Sydney, and right into where I'm leading next. What if radon levels come over more than 4.0 picocuries? That is a material fact that I have to disclose. If I find out that the radon levels over 4.0 picocuries, I have to disclose it. What's an example of how I might find out? Let's pretend that I'm the listing agent and we go under contract. And the buyer has their tests done, their inspections done, and they come back and they tell us that the radon came back as more than 4.0 picocuries. One thing we're getting ready to learn is that homes in North Carolina are sold as is, which means the seller is not required to do any repairs. We'll talk more about that. So the buyer has their radon test. It comes back over 4.0. They ask the seller to put in a radon mitigation system. We can always ask. The worst they can say is no, right? So we ask the seller to put in a radon mitigation system. The seller says, "Nope, I'm not going to do it." The buyer chooses to terminate the contract, and we go back on the market. Don't I now have a material fact on my hand? Don't I now know that that radon level was 7 point something? Even though the seller doesn't have to do repairs, sometimes they may want to consider it, because something like radon isn't going to go away. The next buyer is going to have to deal with it, right? The buyer after that, the buyer after that. So it's not something that just disappears. But yes, anything over 4.0 picocuries, if we find out about it, doesn't matter how I find out about it, but if we find out about it, I have to disclose it. Again, we're getting to disclosure, material facts, all that good stuff. That's part of where we're heading in Unit 7. So here's a map of our great state. Kind of gives us where radon levels like to hang out, where they're more popular. This was from a CE class, I think 17, 18, yeah, 2017. But again, this just kind of gives us an idea. The deeper the purple, the higher concentrations of radon we may see. You notice how we don't have as high concentrations down at the coast as what we do in the mountains? The land's different, isn't it? It's a little sandier down at the coast. It's rockier up at the mountains. So it might be that radon can escape easier through sand than it can through rock, through mountain rock. After disclosing that a property we have as a listing, do we disclose that in the actual listing? Again, I'm going to talk, I know you guys have a lot of questions and I got answers for you. I promise when we get there. To answer your question now, it doesn't matter how I get the information out. You want to put it in your listing, you want to pick up the phone and call. It doesn't matter how you get the information out. We just have to disclose it. I got another question on material facts. Guys, I promise you, we are going to get there. I promise you. So again, to answer both questions, it doesn't matter how I disclose it. I just have a duty to disclose. Okay. So when it comes to radon, what's our responsibility? The North Carolina weighs in. They say we have a duty to disclose any known presence of radon 4.0 picocuries or higher in any sale or lease transaction. The mere presence of a radon mitigation system is not a material fact. We don't have to disclose until or unless we find out that that radon level is 4.0 picocuries or higher. That's what we have to disclose. So if you're getting ready to list a property and you're in the basement, you see some kind of funny contraction down there, or you see some kind of random pipe coming outside the house, ask questions. Ask questions and ask your seller, when was the last time you had it tested? Have you had it tested in the last 5-10 years? Because it very well may be that those little fans go out and they don't last forever. Another environmental concern is formaldehyde. We find this in pressed wood, so think like plywood, fiberboard, for example. You may also find formaldehyde in foam insulation. A lot of the furniture we build, the glue that we build our furniture has formaldehyde in it. Where are my High Point people? You know how much formaldehyde we got when market rolls into town? All sorts of formaldehyde. I had a pre-licensing student actually a couple years ago say she bought a bed and the bed came with a big red sticker on it that said, may have used formaldehyde in constructing this bed. It's everywhere. We're still using it. We did ban it at one point, but since then it's been reduced to a warning. And that's what she found. That's why she found that big red sticker on her new bed, because it's a warning. Formaldehyde can cause respiratory problems. Again, we breathe the air. Those particles get into our lungs. The reason that the ban was reduced to a warning is because there's inconclusive evidence about how it affects humans. So they just put a warning out. It may cause respiratory issues. Again, ventilation can help. We need to keep the air moving. Another environmental concern we have is carbon monoxide. This one's just bad. This is bad. Carbon monoxide is another colorless, odorless. It's a byproduct of incomplete fuel combustions. So if you have a missing wire, for example, that's right, running cars, missing wire, something like that, and they're not completing, they're not connecting, then they could release this carbon monoxide. Carbon monoxide is bad. Cases of carbon monoxide, people go to sleep at night and they just don't wake up in the morning. It happens that fast. Y'all remember the hotel in Boone? How many years ago was that? 10 years ago, something like that. 2 families died before they traced it down to carbon monoxide. Y'all remember this? It came down to, it traced back to carbon monoxide. So how do we protect ourselves from carbon monoxide? Get you a good carbon monoxide detector. Some of our smoke detectors being sold today also include a carbon monoxide detector. If you don't have a carbon monoxide detector in your home, I really would like you to go out and get one this weekend. That's the only way to know of possible carbon monoxide. Help protect you and your family. Another environmental concern, and it's a fun unit. Another environmental concern we have is electromagnetic fields. All of our power generators, power lines, power poles, they could be of concern. Again, there's no conclusive evidence. There is major controversy, but really the jury is still out about long-term effects of exposure to electromagnetic fields. Have you guys ever seen a big power pole and then a house like right next to it? Right? It's been my experience that either it bothers people or it doesn't. So if your buyer has a concern about being that close to a power pole, then don't show them that house. If you have concerns, if you want to know more about it, you can contact your power company and they can come out and do an EMF test. EMF, electromagnetic field. So they can come out and do an EMF test. Another environmental concern is groundwater contamination. Our groundwater is water that exists under the Earth's surface. It's what forms our water table. Different areas have different water tables. The further east you go, the higher it is. Remember the other day we mentioned your wetlands, our wetlands down east, down at the coast. They have a very high water table, close to the ground, is what I mean. Once our groundwater gets contaminated, that contamination is going to spread wherever the water goes. So as the water flows, it could spread that contamination, and it could eventually wind up into our drinking water, our water supply. I remember in High Point, probably 7-8 years ago, we had an Ebola scare. There was something that, and I was out and about anyway when that news broke, so I was able to get to the store and get some water before it got crazy in there. But I'm telling you, there was already a woman in there throwing some elbows in there to get her water. So I can't imagine what that looked like, you know, a couple hours later. From that experience, that taught me to have spare water laying around. So I went out, got a couple jugs of water. So if our public water, drinking water ever gets contaminated with Ebola again, I'm all set. So when you're carbon monoxide detector shopping this weekend, get you a couple cases of spare water to have on hand. Hate to grow up your shopping list, but I want you guys to be safe. I want to keep you guys safe and protected. Another environmental concern is underground storage tanks. Underground storage tanks, some storage, well, let me go back. All storage tanks have some kind of fuel. May that be oil or gas, for example. Some storage tanks are above ground. Some storage tanks are below ground with a little pipe for ventilation, access to fill. Some are buried and long gone. It used to be that we thought the solution for oil tanks or storage tanks that we were no longer using was just to bury them out of sight, out of mind, right? The problem is that they're steel corrodes over time. And when they corrode, the contents, the oil or the gas, leak out into the ground. It is estimated, somewhere in your book, I think it tells us that there are millions of unknown storage tanks across the country. Again, out of sight, out of mind, don't have to worry about them, right? Now we got to worry about them. If there is a leak caused by an underground storage tank, the owner of the property is going to be the one, wherever the tank originated, that person is going to be responsible for cleanup. Now, there's funding in place, so they may be able to apply for some financial help. There's various resources out there. What we can do with agents, as agents with these, when you're walking the land with your buyers or sellers and you trip over a pipe sticking out the ground, that pipe is probably attached to an underground storage tank. So if we notice a pipe, some kind of vent line, even stained soil, that should throw up a little flag for us to ask some questions. There's so many laws out there about detention and cleanup and or removal. This is not just something you can run back there with your funnel and kitty litter and say, we can take care of this. This causes is a call to the professionals. Let them come in and handle it. Anything to do with tanks, and you don't need to know this, this is just more FYI. We have something called the North Carolina Leaky Petroleum Underground Storage Tank Cleanup Act. You guys make yourself a note on page 505 after class. If you haven't already, there's a fascinating story, page 505, that example. Fascinating story about what happens with some of these underground storage tanks. Again, I need to be on the lookout for red flags. If I see a pipe sticking out of the ground, I should have a flag go up that should cause me to ask some more questions, investigate a little bit further. When it comes to underground storage tank, if we know of a current or a previous underground storage tank on the property, we have to disclose it. Are we starting to see a theme? What's my duty as a broker? Disclose, disclose, disclose. We'll talk more about that as we get into Unit 7. If we know of an underground storage tank, we should, and we're working with buyers, we should encourage our buyers to have somebody come in to inspect it. It's part of their inspections when we're under contract that we will talk about. I promise. Another environmental concern could be our landfills. Landfills are highly regulated. They either dig a hole and kind of line it for the purpose of a landfill, or maybe they use what's left from a surface mining operation. But landfills, we got to have controlled drainage. We need to know, where that stuff is going. That's got to be controlled and regulated. Landfills help aid with the breakdown. So you're usually looking at like layer of trash, layer of dirt, layer of trash, layer of dirt. Again, some buyers have a concern about living near landfills, others don't. If they do have a concern, have your Google Maps ready. If they say, I want to see 123 Main Street, well, let's see how far away 123 Main Street is from the landfill. If you live near a landfill, if you walk outside on a hot, sticky July day, don't you? It does not smell good. Another environmental concern is mold. Mold's everywhere. Mold is everywhere. Let's take a big, deep breath, everybody. You probably just breathed in some kind of mold particle. Sorry, it's everywhere. It is everywhere. Mold just needs a little bit of moisture, some oxygen, and that's all it needs to grow. Mold can grow really fast. Really, really fast. Again, it affects respiratory, anything that gets in the air. Anytime something gets in the air and we breathe that air. And mold, not all mold is bad, right? You could have, I mean, mold ranges. You could have like the mold in that loaf of bread that you've had too long, right? Start growing a beard on your bread, up to like black toxic mold. And there's so many different variations in between. Guys, please remember, I don't want you to stress. Every single one of my PowerPoints is in Learn, Test, Pass. And we're recording. We're seeing lots of green stars in Unit 20, aren't we? So what do green stars tell us? Are you going to see lots and lots and lots and lots of questions in Unit 20? No. So I apologize for going fast. I want to get to the good stuff. I want to get to the red star stuff. Fair enough? Remember, all of my PowerPoints are in Learn, Test, Pass. And please also remember that we are recording. So if you need to go back, you have that option after this evening. For agents, for brokers, when it comes to mold, any type of leak or flooding should throw up a red flag for us to ask questions about mold. So if you see a water stain on the ceiling, well, I don't know where it came from. Maybe it was a leaky roof, maybe it was a broken pipe, I don't know. But I know because there's a water stain there, something leaked, and there could be mold around. Have you guys ever walked into a basement and said, this smells basementy? There's no smell as basementy. What you're smelling is some kind of mold or mildew. Sometimes you can detect it. The problem with mold for homeowners is that insurance company no longer cover mold. They used to cover it, but they don't anymore. They dropped it. I guess it got too expensive. So now the liability for mold is directly on the homeowners. Again, if we're aware of mold, we have a duty to disclose. So when it comes to mold, the Real Estate Commission says that the mere presence of mold is not a material fact unless it's in excessive amount. And they define an excessive amount of more than 1 square foot of mold. So if you're smelling it, if you're seeing it, then it's probably an excessive amount. And as we said, we need to look out for those red flags. We need to be able to identify signs. How can I identify signs? Leaks, floods, prior water damage. I'll share this with you guys before we go into break. My team had a house listed 7-8 years ago. And it was vacant. It was an estate. The nephew was selling it for his aunt that had passed. And so he had never, ever lived there. And we went under contract and the buyer hired the home inspector and the home inspector went in. And one thing the home inspector will do is test the AC, make sure it works, especially in a vacant home. It probably wasn't on. Here's where the story gets a little troubling. The home inspector swears that he turned that AC off when he was done. This is what I know. When somebody woke up the next day they went into that house, the AC was set at 56 degrees. It had been running that hard all night. The floor, the ceiling, and the wall were covered in mold. All that condensation. It took that little time for it to cover that entire, it was like the living room and part of the entry and a little bit of the kitchen. Home inspector denies all. You know what we learned from that? After our home inspector goes inspects a vacant property, we go check on the property. Sometimes we live and we learn, right? It's not going to happen to our listings again. But that's just a crazy story of how little it takes, how fast it can grow. Is that not wild? After that, until the poor nephew, like I said, it was an estate. He kind of got stuck with it and he didn't want to deal with it anyway. And then this happened and he was just, it had to be taken care of. And after that, we had to put signs up that said, you know, wear masks. This is before the day we were wearing masks everywhere anyway, you know, but we had to warn people about entering the home, because now you could see it everywhere. You could see it on the floors and the walls and the ceilings. It was wild. So let's go to break on that note. Isn't that a fun note to leave things on? So let's take 10. We come back, we're awfully close to wrapping up unit 20. All right. We're back. All right. Looks like we're back. We're good. We're good. All right. So let's take attendance and say cheese. Actually, let's not say money. You guys, if you say money, you can't not say money and not smile. So if you go money, you have to smile because you know what we like? We like money and cheese. I guess they both work. All right. So let's wrap up this unit. I told you we're going to get through it pretty quickly. Again, lots of green stars, basic understanding. We just saw this. This wraps up mold. So federal and North Carolina issues, the act revolving around all these environmental issues is CERCLA, Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation Liability Cleanup. Where did they come up with some of these names, right? What we're saying with CERCLA, what the EPA may offer us, there sometimes is federal funding for cleanup of environmental spills, environmental hazards. So again, any environmental concerns start with the EPA's website. That's always your first place to start. If your seller has concerns, if your buyer has concerns. And like we said, the owner, wherever the environmental issue started, that is the owner that's going to be responsible for cleanup, even if it was caused by the previous owner. So the previous owner may not have known that there was an underground storage tank buried in the backyard, right? And now it starts corroding and contaminating when the current owner owns it. Just to point it out to you guys, again, please don't get bogged down on it, but pages 510 to 511 talk about specific acts that we have in North Carolina for specific issues. So there's the underground storage tank that we just saw. We have a Coastal Area Management Act, Mountain Ridge Protection Act, Dredge and Fill Act, and Sediment Pollution Control Act. So this information and others can be found on the EPA's website. So as we've been saying, who's liable for it? Well, the owner carries most of the liability. We may need to help point them in the right direction, help let them know where they go, that they can get assistance for cleanup. But we as brokers, even though the owner carries most of the liability, we as brokers are not off the hook. What's our biggest responsibility when it comes to environmental issues? What's our number one duty? What's the thing we need to do? Disclose. We have a duty to disclose once we find out about it. Understand, it's not my job to go out there and find it. But if I do happen to find out about it, maybe through previous reports as we discussed, then I have a duty to disclose it. We're having all sorts of computer issues. What's going on out there today? We came from break and I had a couple more texts from you guys. Something's going on. And that gets us through Unit 20. Is there some storms last night? Yeah. So we got key terms, 497, key point review, 512 to 514. Student quiz 515 to 516. Again, you guys, unit 20 is not a heavily tested unit. Green stars, basic understandings. Don't spend all your study time in unit 20. Fair enough? I got many other units for you guys to spend all your time in. Many. And we're getting ready to get into that. So back to lead, and let's look at this addendum. And while I'm pulling this up in Learn, Test, Pass, why don't you guys remind me in a private chat, what's the magic year when it comes to lead in the home? What's the year we have to know when it comes to lead in the home? I'd like to hear from all of you, please. In a private chat, what's that magic year? Looks like we're good. All homes built prior to 1978. If you're dealing with a home built prior to 1978, if you look in the Unit 20 material of Learn, Test, Pass, we have our very first form, first of many. What did we just say an addendum does? I mean, what an addendum does. What does an addendum do? An addendum adds. When you guys see the word addendum, see the word add. Particularly, we're going to add it to our sales contract. Now, we're going to talk about contracts and contract law and how contracts work and all that good stuff about contracts later, where we actually start looking at our forms. But an addendum adds. So we got our lead-based paint or lead-based paint hazard addendum. We're going to identify the property, the seller, and the buyer. And then check it out. It tells us right here. This addendum is attached to and made part of the offer to purchase and contract between the buyer and the seller for the property. So it tells us that this addendum adds. It is attached to and made part of. We have something called the due diligence period that I will talk about in Unit 10. The buyer shall have the right to obtain a risk assessment or inspection of the property for the presence of lead-based paint or lead-based paint hazard at the buyer's expense. The buyer can waive their right to obtain a risk assessment at any time without cause. Then we have a bold statement that says intact lead-based paint that is in good condition is not necessarily a hazard. The addendum then directs us to that EPA pamphlet, Protect Your Family from Lead in the Home. So how do we educate consumers about lead and about possible dangers of lead? We get that pamphlet in their hand. Like I said, you could purchase, or maybe your firm wants to purchase the nice fancy looking brochure, but you can also get a flat PDF. Then we start with a lead warning statement. And yeah, I'll let you guys read this, but it tells us anything built prior to 78, there may present exposure from lead in the home. This is no guarantee that because your home was built prior to 1978, there's lead in it. We're just giving a warning. We're just letting you know you may see lead. And it goes on to tell us that you may place young children at risk for developing lead poisoning. Again, when it comes to lead, the concern is those developing bodies. The seller is required to provide the buyer with any information they have from a risk assessment or inspection in the seller's possession, and notify the buyer of any known lead-based paint hazard, a risk inspection, a risk assessment for possible lead is recommended prior to purchase. And all that is discussed in this booklet, Protect Your Family from Lead in Your Home. Then we have some seller disclosures. The seller has to disclose if they know of any presence of lead-based paint in a home. So they either know of lead-based paint or they have no knowledge. And if they have records and reports available, they need to provide those to the buyer. So again, if they've had contracted work done and it came back with records and reports, then they have to disclose that to the buyer. So they're going to disclose that they do have those reports, or they have no reports or records. And then the buyer has to acknowledge some things. Buyer acknowledges receipt of seller's statement. They're going to receive or acknowledge that they received the Protect Your Family from Lead in Your Home. And then they either need to accept or waive the opportunity to conduct a risk assessment or inspection as part of their due diligence period. Again, we will talk about the due diligence period in Unit 10. So when you list the home that was built prior to 1978, you're the listing agent. We're going to go ahead and have the seller start this. We're going to fill out the property and the seller, right? The seller's going to do their disclosures. The majority of agents, the majority of brokers across the state will then make this form available in the multiple listing services. So other brokers have access to it. Once now you're a buyer's agent, so listing agent, you help your seller complete it, you talk to them about complete, and you provide them with this form, and you help them do the seller disclosures. Now, when you're a buyer's agent, when your buyer says, this is the house, I want to make an offer on it, we're going to have them acknowledge that they have received these various things, that we have talked about these various things. There's also a place here for the listing agent to acknowledge that they have informed the seller of their obligations under this U.S. law, and that they're aware of their responsibility for compliance. Buyer signs on the left and seller signs on the right. That's another common theme that we're going to start seeing as we start looking at our forms. Buyer on the left, seller on the right. Lead-based paint or lead-based paint hazard addendum. Just FYI, this is the for sale version. There's another version that's very similar for a lease transaction, because even though the tenant isn't purchasing the home, they're moving in and possibly moving in with young children. So they too need to be aware of lead and the possible concerns. How do we help them, educate them? Get the booklet in their hand, that Protect Your Family from Lead in Your Home. Question comes up about who's responsible for the buyer inspections. The buyer's responsible for all of their inspections. We will talk about that, and it tells us right here. The buyer can have a risk assessment at their expense. So all these tests and inspections, and again, we will get there. We'll talk a lot more about this. This just happens to come up now because it's a good time to talk about it in Unit 20. That's a good point. That's a good point. What if you don't have kids now, but you may want kids later, right? So again, we're providing them this information. It may not be of an issue today, but what if you get pregnant tomorrow? Now you could have a concern, so you need to be aware. Question comes in, do these forms look different depending on the brokerage? That's a great question. I've never had that before. Any of the standard forms that we're going to talk about, that's what these refer to as standard forms. All of these come from the North Carolina Bar Association and the North Carolina Association of Realtors. So as long as you are a realtor and you're a member of the National Association of Realtors, that also gets you into the state level, the North Carolina Association of Realtors, and it's NCAR that provides our forms, our standard forms. Again, we'll talk all about forms. These aren't the only forms I'm allowed to use, and we will talk about that as we go. But most commonly used are these standard forms from NCAR, North Carolina Association of Realtors. Thank you. More on forms coming in a couple units. Questions? Comments? How y'all feeling about environmental? Some scary stuff in there. Every time I do this, I mean, I do this like 5 times a year, and I'm like, God, what do we breathe? All right. Y'all want a Kahoot? Y'all want to play our game? Get your phones out. I'll get you a QR code. This Kahoot is going to be on units 4, 5, and 6. So unit 4, we talked about legal descriptions and survey. Here's your QR code. Unit 5 was our attorney's unit where we talked about title and deed. And then unit 6 was our land use control. So we talked about zoning and covenants, public restrictions, and private restrictions, all on various restrictions on how we can or maybe cannot use our land. So you're either scanning the QR code with your phone. Once you do that, you should just be able to enter your name and get right in. Or if you're going to the website or the app, you'll need a game pin. Website or app needs a game pin. And that game pin is right there for this game. Yeah, you're not going to be able to. Guys, remember I'm recording. I get asked a lot, can we go back and Kahoot again? Well, you can because I'm recording. The only other way I could give you access to my Kahoot is if I give you my logon and password, and that's not going to happen. So recording is your option. Somebody's saying you can still scan the code. You may just have to sit this one out. I'm not really sure. Give you another minute or so to get in. Again, this Kahoot, units 4, 5, and 6. Let's test your knowledge and see how we're doing. I'm okay if you use nicknames. Just keep them clean. Emojis, you guys can use emojis. That's fun sometimes. Just keep them clean. If your phone goes to sleep, it's going to look like you're removed from Kahoot. So just make sure your phone stays awake while we're waiting on people to get in. Okay. Everybody in that wants to play? Y'all ready to Kahoot? Let's see what we got. Oh, got a few more coming. Brian's starting out on fire. I don't know who Sunflower is. You'll have to tell me in a private chat who you are. I think that's great. I'd like to think it's inspired by my picture back here, but maybe not. I don't know. That's what I thought. All right, y'all ready? Let's Kahoot. Units 4, 5, and 6. Question number 1. The system of legal description that defines a parcel of land by its parameter is ten seconds. System of legal description that defines a parcel of land by its parameter is meets and bounds. Remember, meets and bounds gives us a tour of the property. You start at the point of beginning and you work from monument to monument and you work your way around. And then what we have is the parameters. We have the lines. And while the survey doesn't identify the improvements, we know that all improvements within those lines is going to convey. The rectangular survey system, that's our government rectangular survey system. The grid system that we use out west, lot and block, is our plat map. And then the previously recorded deed is very seldomly used today. Reference to that. Any questions on this one? Looks like we're pretty good. So let's see who answered it the fastest. Jerome got in fast, followed by Liv, Ashley C, Marie, and Eve. Question number 2. In a North Carolina real estate transaction, excise taxes are the responsibility of ten seconds. In North Carolina, who pays excise taxes? The seller. The seller pays them. That's an expense that they will have at closing. Okay, that's an expense that they will have at closing. That's where we took the purchase price and rounded it up, or divide by 500 and then round it up to the nearest whole dollar. This is why I love you guys. Very rarely do I get somebody to say the real estate agent, and I can hear your brains working talking about, I don't know what that is, but I know darn well I'm not paying it. I'm going to let the buyer or the seller or possibly even the attorney pay it. So now we know who pays excise taxes, the seller. We'll see this again in Unit 21 when we go to closing and start breaking down some of those expenses. Questions on this one? So now we got, oh, Jerome's the one to beat this round, you guys. He stayed on top. John crept up, Carmen C and Mitch M. Eve stayed on the board. Question number 3. Which of the following deeds contain no express or implied warranties? Seven seconds. What deed has no express or implied warranties? That's our quitclaim deed. Good job. There are no warranties with a quitclaim deed. Remember, express mean the terms have been clearly stated. Implied means it's based on actions. So this quitclaim deed has no express or implied warranties. This is generally what we're going to use maybe to create an easement or to correct a mistake. Maybe there was a misspelled name or an incorrect address. We're not really conveying anything. General warranty deed, this concerns me a little bit. General warranty deed has the most warranties. Remember those 5 different warranties, those 5 different covenants that we talked about? This is the one that's the most protection for the buyer. So please make sure. Unit 5 tends to be tricky. So please make sure as you're going back and reviewing that you're not overlooking Unit 5. Questions? All right, let's see. Uh-oh, Carmen C. Jerome, you got competition now. Carmen C is jumping up a little bit. John Lean crept up this round. Mitch M stayed on the board. Devin is our highest climber this round. She's up 15 places. Good job. Question number 4. Which of the following is an essential element of a valid North Carolina deed? Five seconds. Which of the following is an essential element? Word of conveyance. Let's pause here for a second. You guys got your books handy? Let's go look at page 87. Page 87. Page 87 gives us the bullet points, the items that are an essential element of a valid deed. Remember, what am I referring to by saying a valid deed? This is what the judge is looking for. The judge wants to know if this is a legal document. Is it valid? So how is the judge determining the validity? They're looking for these bullet points on page 87. The required ingredients, if you will. When we flip over to page 88, we see the elements that are not required to have a valid deed. Is it required to record? Yes, but it's not a requirement of a valid deed. It's a requirement of the Connor Act. The Connor Act is the one that tells us that we have to record, not what the judge is looking for. I really suggest you guys spend time with 87 and 88. I would even recommend doing on your notes after class, doing a nice side-by-side comparison. This is what is required for a valid deed. This is what is not required, but often found. Questions on this one? This one tends to be a problem topic, so this is why I like Kahoot, so we can be reminded and have a conversation about it. Working the kinks out before the test.
Miss Julie,
Yes.
you say that was for the Connor Act? Recordation, you said that's Connor Act or
It's the Connor Act that tells us that after we record. Why do we record? Because the Connor Act tells us to. Yes, ma'am. Other questions on this one?
And just so I'm clear, if we don't record, that means the seller can sell it to someone else. And if they record, it can be their property or
North
something.
Carolina
Right?
is a pure race state, right? So the first one to get to the courthouse and record wins. It's a race. This is why the Connor Act stepped up and said, okay, this deed is valid, but let's take it a step further and record. If you're protecting your interest, why do you record? To protect that deed, to protect that interest. If we don't record, how does anybody else know that it's there? How does anybody else know that you are the owner of record? And that's where Connor comes in. Yep. Everybody good? You guys got that written down? Pages 87 and 88? Julie, I promise I'll look at that this weekend. Promise? Make you guys pinky swear? Okay. All right. Again, you guys, unit 5 tends to be a struggle. And I think a lot of times it's just because we tend to overlook it. So as you're reviewing, please don't neglect unit 5. Fair enough? Okay. Let's see what happened. Oh, Jerome came back. Lean crept up. Mario came up. John stayed on the board. Sydney crept up. And it looks like 3 of you are on fire with an answer streak of 3 in a row. Question number 5, restrictive covenants. Eight seconds. Restrictive covenants, look at you guys. Apply to and bind to all successive owners of the property. What's that mean? Restrictive covenants are pertinent, which means they run with the land. Owner number 1 has to abide by the covenants. Owner number 2, owner number 450. Everybody that buys in this subdivision and this HOA has to apply with the covenants. The developer creates them, and after they leave, they still apply. They don't go away with the developer. They stay with the land. They run with the land, and that's what we mean by being a pertinent. Questions on this one? This is a good response. That didn't move much, did it? Oh, no, there goes. Ah, got John crept up. The rest of you stayed on the board. It looks like Mario answered a little bit faster than Jerome this time. Lean or Sydney. 3 of you are on fire now with an answer streak of 4 in a row. So that's fun. Question number 6. The primary intent of zoning is to ten seconds. What zoning's primary intent? Good job, you guys. We're going to control the use of the land and the structures on the land. Government regulations. There is no statewide zoning regulations. Remember, our Enabling Act tells us that zoning is local in nature. So each city, town, county, municipality is going to regulate their own zoning. We're not trying to limit businesses. We may have a buffer zone, but it's not its primary intent. So what's its main purpose? Control the use of the land. That's why it's called a land use control, a public land use control. Questions on this one? These 5 are toggling. Mario stayed up top, Lean came up, John stayed put, Sydney and Jerome. Bruce is our highest climber this round. You came up 9 places. And our last one for this Kahoot, which of the following best describes a variance? Ten seconds. What best describes a variance? An exception to the zoning ordinance. One property owner is asking permission to break the rules. How many property owners with a variance? Just one. They're asking permission to break the rules. They're going to the zoning board and saying, because of your zoning ordinances, I can't use my property the way I intended. Will you allow me to break the rules? Cool. Questions on this one? All right, let's see the final podium. Our 3rd place winner this Kahoot is John. Good job, John. Our 2nd place is Lean. Awesome. And our 1st place is Mario M. Kind of crept up out of nowhere. So good job, guys. 4th runner up is Sydney. And our 5th is Jerome. What do we think? Do we like to Kahoot? Is Kahooting good? It's fun, isn't it? It helps me see where we are as a class. Hopefully it helps you see where you are as an individual, right? If you're getting these Kahoot questions right, or wrong, I guess I should say, if you're getting these Kahoot questions wrong, then hopefully you're making a mental note to go back into that material. Questions? All right, I need to stop sharing just for 1 second while you guys are thinking of your questions. And where we're heading next is Unit 7. And Unit 7 starts on page 134. So again, while I'm getting set up here, if you want to start finding 134, and actually before we start, let's have an eyeball to eyeball conversation. Can you guys see me? Can everybody see me? Let's get real. We've been together, what, 2 weeks now? It's hard to believe it's already been 2 weeks. We've been together 2 weeks. We've been quickly going over information. I know we're building up. We're getting to the good stuff. Unit 7 starts the good stuff. I need you guys to write this down really big. Units 7, 8, 9, and 10 are heavily tested units. What are your heavily tested units? 7, 8, 9, and 10. We start unit 7 today. In less than 2 weeks, we've been through what, 7 units, 1 through 6 and 20, right? We're going to spend the next 2 to 3 classes just in unit 7. When I say we're getting into the meat, into the good stuff, this is where it starts. Units 7 and 8 are about our agency relationships. What is my responsibility in working with buyers and sellers? What is my role? What am I supposed to be doing? What is their responsibility in working with me? So 7 and 8 are about agency. 9 and 10 is about our contracts. The contracts that we use every single day. How many of you looked ahead at unit 7 before today? You can be honest with me. I'm just more curious. I see some hands going up. I wish I saw more. I'm not going to lie. I wish I saw more. Guys, the material that we're getting ready to go over, we're going to see lots of red stars, which means not only do you have to know what the word means, but you need to be able to apply it. You need to be able to use it in a situation. This is what I mean by going deep. You are not going to master unit 7 by paying attention in class today. It's not going to happen. You guys are not going to walk out of here today as agency experts. Agency is too complex. There's too much involved for you to grasp it by listening to me talk about it for 2 hours. So how are you going to grasp agency? How are you going to get unit 7, 8, 9, and 10? You've got to expose yourself to it over and over and over again. You need to read the unit. You need to read these units. You need to go back and listen to the recording again. You need to take the quizzes. The more different ways that you can expose yourself to agency, I promise you, the easier it will be to grasp it. Again, your test is not going to ask you, when it comes to these units, it's not going to ask you, what does an agent mean or what does an agent do? Your test is an application test, which means it's going to put you in a situation, and based on what you know about agency is how you answer that question. I cannot stress the importance of the next 2 weeks that we're going to be in these 4 units, maybe even 2.5 weeks that we're going to be in these 4 units. We'll start 7 today. We'll do 7 on Tuesday. We may even have to finish it up on Thursday. And once we're done with 7, we're moving on to 8. So if you've not looked ahead yet, please, please, please take this weekend and look at 7 and 8 so you can be prepared for next week. I'm going to talk about stigmatized properties in unit 7. I promise I will get there. Does everybody have that written down? 7, 8, 9, and 10. I once had a pre-licensing student told me that I had her waking up in the middle of the night going 7, 8, 9, and 10. I said, perfect. That's exactly where I need you to be. Good job. This is where I need you guys dreaming about this stuff. Okay? I don't want you having nightmares about it, but I need you dreaming about it. Have I made my point? Nothing blows my mind more than after the test, somebody says, there were a lot of questions about agency. Yes, you are going to see a lot of questions about agency. You are going to see a lot of questions about contracts. Lots of red stars, heavily tested units. I sat down, because y'all know by now I'm a math nerd, right? So I sat down once and actually figured it out. 40% of your exam comes from 7, 8, 9, and 10. Heavily tested units. Okay. All right. I know we're a little early on break, but I would like to go ahead and take our break now before we get started, so we don't have to stop in just a couple minutes. So let's go ahead and take 10. We come back. We are on page 134. Are we back and ready? Did you guys get a shot of coffee or something while we were, hopefully it was just coffee. By the time I'm done with y'all at 1, you may want to be doing shots of something else, but just wait till 1, okay? Hold off until 1, please. And don't do too many because then you got to study. So, all right. Some of you aren't old enough to do shots. All right, here we go. Let me take attendance. Here you go. All right, it's to my understanding, when you guys signed up for this class, maybe you knew what you were getting into, maybe you didn't, but it's to my understanding that these are the units. I think this is the reason why you guys think you're here, is to understand that brokerage relationship. It's to understand that relationship between me and the consumer. And particularly when we get into 9 and 10, that contract law. So I can write up a sales contract for my buyers and sellers. So unit 7 is the brokerage relationships, laws, and practice. And in this unit, amongst other things, we're going to talk about, we have different types of agency. We're going to talk about something called a fiduciary relationship. There's another new fancy word. We're going to differentiate between a customer and a client. And I have different roles and responsibilities for both. I don't owe the customer the same thing that I owe my client. And we're also going to talk about how you become my client. How do you make sure that you get those different roles than what I owe to a customer? And then we're going to talk about how I can disclose my agency status. The public has a right to know if I'm representing, for example, the seller, and what that means to them when they're communicating with me. So in this unit, we have agency disclosure. Just FYI, unit 8 is more about creating agency. So in unit 8, we're going to start looking at our listing agreement between us and the seller, for example. We'll look at our buyer's agency agreement. So we're going to kind of dig a little deeper when we get into unit 8. I like to lump them both together because 7 and 8 are our agency units. 7 and 8 are all about agency. So before we go to the book, let me first introduce you guys to just some concepts, some things that we will see later in the book, I promise you. But I think to start this conversation, it's easier for you guys to have a basic understanding of a few things. So what I would like you guys to do is just put your pencil down and listen for just a second. I promise you, everything that we're getting ready to talk about to introduce you to, I promise we will see it again in the PowerPoint. So just take a few minutes, breathe, put your pencil down, and let me just introduce you to some terms and some concepts that may help make this stuff a little bit clearer. The first concept that we need to have an understanding on, North Carolina is a caveat emptor state. Caveat emptor is Latin for let the buyer beware. In North Carolina, sellers don't have to disclose much. Sellers don't have to do repairs. Sellers don't have to do anything but sell their house, right? The seller's biggest responsibility is to convey clear marketable title. So the responsibility of learning about the property is on the buyer. Caveat emptor. When the buyer hires an agent, that agent takes on the responsibility with the buyer. Seller doesn't have to disclose much. They don't have to repair. Buyer is the one responsible for learning about the property. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so when it comes to caveat emptor, let the buyer beware. Does that, or do you have to let so if the seller doesn't know anything about the property?
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. You're breaking up. I'm sorry.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Kinda.
Is it okay? So does this apply to the seller as well? So does the seller and the buyer have to be aware, or does this just apply to the buyer?
Caveat emptor is about the seller, because we're saying that caveat emptor actually means let the buyer beware. So caveat emptor is why the seller doesn't have to disclose. why the seller doesn't have to do any repairs, because the onus is on the buyer. Buyer beware. That's the state that we're in. Okay. We'll talk about the buyer's responsibilities, various things that they may want to inspect and investigate. Furthermore, in the buyer's contract process as we go. Okay, do I hear another question? Something else I need you guys to wrap your brains around early. The principal is the buyer or seller, and they hire the firm. The relationship with the buyer or the seller is not with the individual agent. The relationship is with the firm. The firm allows me to work with their buyer or seller. You guys hear agents walking around all the time. I do it. I promise you'll do it too. You hear us walking around talking about my seller and my buyer. They're not mine. They're the firm's seller. They are the firm's buyer. The firm allows me to work with their buyer and seller. So let me ask you guys this. We'll talk about commission. Again, I promise, Unit 8, we'll do commission math. But who do you think the commission belongs to? Is it my commission or is it the firm's commission? It's the firm's commission. The firm pays me a portion of their commission for working with their seller or buyer. I will talk about, I'm not answering questions about commission right now. We will get to it at the end of Unit 8. We will talk about your commission in Unit 8. I promise, hang on to it for now. What we need to understand right now is the relationship is between the buyer and seller and the firm, not the individual agent. All homes in North Carolina are sold as is, which means the seller is not required to do any repairs. We can always ask, but the seller has every right to say no. Homes that are advertised as is. Have you guys ever seen a home as is on like Zillow or Realtor.com? What that tells me as the agent is the seller is not willing to do repairs. They are telling us as is, we're not willing to do repairs, but guess what? I can still ask, right? The worst they can do is say no, you know, but all homes are as is. And I think that's important that we understand that the seller's not required to fix a thing. They don't have to change a light bulb if they don't want to, as is. And guys, I got something to share with you. And this might be shocking information. There is no such thing as a perfect home. All homes have problems. All homes have something that needs to be fixed or repaired, even new construction. Humans build it. Humans make mistakes. So there is no such thing as a perfect home. All homes have problems and issues. In North Carolina, they are sold as is. In most transactions, the seller typically pays the commission to the listing firm. The listing firm shares their commission with the firm that brings the buyer. The seller pays the listing firm. The listing firm shares their commission with the firm that brings the buyer. The firms then share their commission with the agent. An exception to this, for example, might be a for sale by owner, or as we like to call them in the biz, FSBOs, for sale by owner. FSBOs they didn't hire a firm. They went on their own, right? They're all out on there by themselves. They don't have representation. They don't have a firm. The for sale by owner may or may not pay the buyer's commission, the buyer's agent's commission. If the for sale by owner isn't going to pay the buyer's agent, then the buyer gets to. That's one thing that our agency agreements cover that we will look at in Unit 8 is who's going to pay me, how much, and when. We've got to have these conversations with these principals when they hire us about how I expect to get paid and when. Right now, let's just understand the seller typically pays the commission to the listing firm. The listing firm shares their commission with the firm that brings the buyer. As we've been saying, we are fact finders only. We provide the facts for them to make the decision, for the buyer and seller to make the decision. Can I tell anybody what to do? I've yet to figure out how, if so. And you think about it, the seller is the one selling their property, hopefully for a profit. The buyer is the one paying this purchase price. What right do I have to step in and with no interest in this property whatsoever and say, this is what you're going to do? I'm a fact finder only. My job is to help the buyer and seller make informed decisions. That's why I'm helping them gather that information so they can make an informed decision. Question just came in about commission. I promise you we will cover commission in Unit 8. And by the way, that 6%, that's a federal violation you just said. We will talk about something called price fixing in Unit 8. So please bear with me, you guys. I wish I could open my mouth and have it all fall out, but it doesn't work that way. Actually, I wish I had a magic pill that I could sell you guys. You pop the pill, you get all the information crammed in your brain. Truth be told, though, if I had that pill, I wouldn't be here. I'd be out on the street selling my magic pill. You know what I'm saying? So we got to go through the process. And please, everybody, rest assured, this may or may not be your first time through pre-licensing, but it's not mine. So please just trust the system. You know, I've been here before. I get it. We're excited. I'm getting questions. So what if a leak was discovered by an agent? Do I have to disclose? Sure. We're going to talk about that. I promise you, we will talk about it. Something else I want to introduce you guys to, and we're going to see this again. And I do think you guys may want to write this down or take a screenshot of it or make a note to look in the PowerPoint. We're going to start seeing this a little bit more when we get into Unit 8. And this is just basically having an understanding of the verbiage of the terminology. The agent and firm working with the buyer can be referred to as the buyer's agent or the buyer's firm, but they can also be referred to as the selling agent and the selling firm. The one working with the buyer is the one that is selling the property to the buyer. I am selling the property. Think about buying a car, right? Somebody is selling you that car, you're that buyer. Those working with the seller can be referred to as the seller's agent or the seller's firm, also known as the listing agent and the listing firm. When we start looking at our contracts, when we start looking at our agency agreements, the selling agent, the selling firm, listing agent, listing firm, that's the verbiage that actually shows up on our agency agreements. That's the verbiage that shows up in our contract. So this is why we need to see the difference. And I think the confusion comes in seeing and hearing the understanding between the ing and the er. The er is working with the seller. The ing is working with the buyer. We'll see this again, this very slide again, but I just want to introduce you to it now so you can start looking for this verbiage, this terminology. Okay. All right. Let's officially get started. We're going to start again. I'm on page, where am I? 134. And we're going to start, we're going to introduce you guys to a concept called the law of agency. What I think is important about this is that the law of agency is not comprised of one law. The law of agency comes from several different sources. It's not one specific law. One source of the law and agency tells us how our agency relationship works. One source is the common law of agency. This is derived from the early days of England, back in the day when people had a king. And we worked with that king, and how we communicated and how we worked with that king was dictated by this common law of agency. Throughout the years, contract law, court cases, court rulings have helped form that relationship, that law of agency. And today we have various North Carolina Real Estate Commission. Particularly the Real Estate Commission gives us license law and commission rule. We're going to talk all about license law and commission rule. Don't worry about that. We will cover that. But it's kind of like all four of these helped form what we understand today as the law of agency. There's a really good story in your book on page 135, the Adena Lawsuit, and you guys please read it after class. The Adena Lawsuit kind of helps us better understand, particularly how agency in North Carolina, how that came to be. So let's step back in time. Once upon a time ago, there was no buyer's agency. Once upon a time ago, we all represented the seller. The buyers were out there on their own with no representation. To better visualize that, imagine going out to a car lot and buying a car. You go to a car lot, you look around the lot, the salesman just kind of pops up out of nowhere, right? Hey folks, how you doing today? Can I help you test drive a car? Help you buy a car? The salesman represents the seller, right? That's their responsibility. Their job is to sell the cars on the lot for their employer. What happens if you don't like any of the cars on that lot? What do? You say thanks, and you go on to the next lot, right? And you keep going from lot to lot until you find the car that you want to buy. That's awfully similar to how real estate used to be. It used to be if you wanted to buy a house, you went to the firm's office and said, I want to buy a house. And they would say, well, this is what we have on inventory. And if you said, no, I don't want any of that, you had to go to the next firm, and you had to firm hop until you found, because you had no representation. So back in like the mid 90s or so, this Adena lawsuit came up, and this happened somewhere in Minnesota. And what happened was a buyer purchased a home, and after they purchased, they found problems, they found issues. And when they took this to court, they took the firm to court, and they were just shocked to learn that the firm didn't represent them. The firm was acting as if it was their agent. The firm was acting as if they had their best interest in mind. And come to find out, they didn't, because there was no buyer representation. Your book tells you that, you know, you guys know how it is, right? One person sues, and then 20 other people step up and say, oh yeah, me too. This is what happened in the Adena lawsuit. And in the end, settlement from the firm was about $19 million. That's with an M, $19 million. So the results of that Adena lawsuit caused real estate commissions across the country, including the North Carolina Real Estate Commission, to readdress how we do agency, to readdress how we handle working with buyers and sellers. Guys, we did not get buyer's agency in North Carolina until about the mid 90s. And if you think about it, that was not that long ago. We didn't have buyer's agency. When you get in the business, you're going to find agents that have been in it long enough to know that when they took pre-licensing, they didn't talk about buyer's agency. It wasn't a thing. So now here we are today. We now have the option to protect, to represent sellers, buyers, possibly even both in the same transaction. We will talk about that. So the Adena lawsuit kind of helped pave the way for where we are today. Not all states practice buyer's agency today. I know, for example, Florida still doesn't have buyer's agency. Are they ever going to get buyer's agency? I don't know. But all states are different, and not all states practice buyer's agency. We mentioned earlier, one of our new concepts, one of our new terms, caveat emptor, your Latin lesson for the day. What does this mean? Let the buyer beware. The burden of discovery is on the buyer. The burden of discovery, the importance of investigating and learning about the property before they buy, is all on the buyer. As I mentioned earlier, when the buyer hires an agent, when the buyer hires a firm, the firm and the agent take on that responsibility of helping the buyer discover, of helping the buyer investigate and inspect, so they can make an informed decision about whether or not to purchase. How are we doing so far? So far, so good? Green stars, just easing you in. All right. Here's another new word for you guys. This word is a fiduciary. A fiduciary is a relationship of trust. Once the consumer hires us, they should trust that we have their best interest in mind. Once the buyer or seller hires the firm, they should be able to rely on the fact that everything I do in this transaction is with their best interest in mind. The fiduciary relationship says I put their interest above all others, sometimes including my own. I need you guys to wrap your brains around this right now. It's not about you. It's about your buyers and your sellers. So the fiduciary relationship is a relationship of trust. It helps dictate how we work with, how we deal with. It allows the principal, the buyer or seller, to know that I have their best interest ahead of anybody else's. So on page 137, we need to define some words. Step 101 says to understand this stuff, we need to have an understanding of some words. Agency is the fiduciary relationship between the principal and the firm. Agency is the fiduciary relationship between the principal and the firm. The principal, also known as the client, is the individual that hires the firm. How do you become my client? You hire me. If you don't hire me, we'll talk about who you are next. So the principal is the individual, also known as the client, and we use them interchangeably all the time. So principal slash client is the one that hires the firm. And in real estate, the client hires the firm for a very particular reason. For example, the seller hires the firm to list and sell their home. They're not hiring me to be their errand boy. They're not hiring me to be their maid, right? What are they hiring me to do? List and sell their property. The buyer hires the firm to help them locate and purchase a home. In a property management situation, the owner hires the firm to manage their property. I got a whole unit dedicated to property management, unit 12. The tenant could hire the firm to help them find and rent a property. Again, you're being hired to do a very particular job. Okay. How do they hire us? They enter into an agency agreement with us. Our agency agreements are discussed in Unit 8. Okay, we're going to use documentation. We're going to use a form for them to hire. The agent is the individual who is authorized to represent the buyer or seller in the transaction. Remember, the client hires the firm allows the agent to work with the buyer or seller. By the way, Unit 7 and 8, we're going to briefly mention property management, but Unit 7 and 8 are heavy concentration on sales. So when we talk about residential sales or commercial sales, we're dealing with buyers and sellers. So the agent is the individual. The subagent, okay, the word sub means under, right? Submarine. Subagent is an agent of an agent. Just write that down for right now. Subagency can get murky. So we'll talk more about, we will explain that more. And when we get to it, right now, just write down an agent of an agent. You're a subagent. You're not an agent of the principal. You're an agent of the agent. And we will spend time on subagency. The customer are the people in the transaction that don't hire me. So from an agent's point of view, I can pretty much take the world, or the state, we'll say, and I can put all buyers and sellers in two categories. Either you hire me or you don't. You're either my client or you're my customer. When I first meet you, you're my customer. Maybe you'll hire me, maybe you won't. So if you're not my client, you're my customer, and I got some examples. Again, we're just defining words right now. A facilitator broker or a transactional broker is a non-agency relationship. What that means is the broker in the transaction is not representing anybody. There is no client in this transaction. Everybody is a customer. Nobody hired me. This relationship, this transactional broker, facilitator broker, is not allowed in North Carolina. In order for us to be involved in the deal, in the transaction, somebody has to hire me. May that be the seller, may that be the buyer. I think this is important because first off, other states offer this transactional broker. You're just there to facilitate the transaction. You don't have any clients, right? You're just helping the parties get from point A to point B. But I also think this is important. Y'all, I had a teammate call me, I'm not kidding, 3 weeks ago, and said a for sale by owner, not represented, right? They're going on their own. Who's selling it for them? Them. So the for sale by owner and an unrepresented buyer, neither one of them wanted to hire them. Can you help me in this transaction? And they called me and said, can I do that? I said, not in North Carolina. In order for me to be involved in the transaction, we have to have one client. Somebody's got to hire me. Again, still trying to wrap our brain around some concepts. I need you guys to hear what I'm saying. I'm, by the way, originally from Northwestern Pennsylvania, and I know I don't sound like I am. So I want to make sure that my northern twang is heard properly. People in the transactions are either represented or unrepresented. The client is represented by the firm. The customer is unrepresented. They didn't hire the firm. Again, how do you become my client? You hire me by entering into an agency agreement. So verbiage, help you guys pay attention to represented versus unrepresented. If you're talking about somebody being represented, that means they've hired you. Unrepresented means they haven't. The for sale by owner is unrepresented. for example. So let's talk a little bit about the client and the customer and various duties that I owe the client and the customer. The agent in the transaction works for the client. We work with the customer. It's the difference in walking side by side versus hand in hand. I'm walking side by side with my customer. I'm there with them. I want to make sure they get to closing. I owe them that. We'll talk more about what I owe them. But my client, I'm holding their hand. I'm carrying their bags. I'm helping them get through this transaction. I'm working for the client. I follow their instructions. I follow their lawful instructions. Again, the client is the one that hires us. They hire us by entering into an agency agreement. So I got a picture of an airplane here. My mentor uses the airplane when she's talking about the difference of client and customer. So I've borrowed it from her. She knows I use it, so I can't steal it, but I am borrowing it. And when she teaches agency, when she talks about client and customer, she uses the analogy of an airplane. So let's pretend you, the agent, are the one piloting this plane. You are the one piloting this plane. And your job is to get everybody on the plane from point A to point B. In other words, from the very beginning of the transaction to closing, right? We're going to put everybody in the plane and we're going to get them to closing. Your clients get to sit in first class. Your clients get the good treatment. They get the champagne and the nice meal, the warm towel. Your customers are back in coach. They're getting the lukewarm Coca-Cola and the unsalted pretzels. It's my job to get everybody from point A to point B. Yes, I'm the one flying this plane. You're in my plane, so it's my job to make sure we get from point A to point B. The difference is the level of service received in between. Clients get first class treatment. Clients get the bells and the whistles. We're getting ready to talk about what clients versus customers get. Check-in time. Questions so far? Please not about something that we will cover. Questions about something we've talked about so far. Breaking it down, simplifying it so we can build on it. Okay. So let's talk a little bit more about client and customer. Let's say, for example, you represent the seller. If you represent the seller in the transaction, that means the customer, your customer is the buyer. That means that you provide client service to the seller, customer service to the buyer. The seller is the one that hired me. They are the ones that's represented. The seller is the client. They are the ones that get first class treatment. If I represent the buyer in the transaction, then that means my customer is the seller. So in this case, the buyer is the one that I'm putting in first class. The seller is who I'm putting back in coach. Am I still helping the seller get to point B? Of course I am. Why? Because that's what's in the best interest of my buyer. If my buyer wants to buy this house, I need to do whatever I need to do with the seller to help my buyer purchase. They're the ones that get the bells and the whistles, the first class. So let's say, for example, which we've mentioned that FSBO, that for sale by owner. In that scenario, the buyer is the one that hires me. The buyer is the client. The for sale by owner is my customer. They chose to go it alone. They chose to go unrepresented. We are going to introduce you guys, probably won't get to it today, but we're going to introduce you guys to scenarios where I could represent both the buyer and the seller in the same transaction, which means I got both buyer and seller sitting in first class. Both of them get client level service. We will talk about that. And if you represent neither buyer or seller, both of them are your customer, nobody gets client level service. That's that transactional broker that we were just talking about that is not allowed in North Carolina. Again, in order for me to be involved in the transaction, somebody's got to hire me. So that transactional broker where I don't represent anybody is not allowed. Do both get the same information? Well, the answer to that question is that depends. And we will break that down and talk about that. Which, by the way, kind of a side note, let's take a pause and regroup. Y'all know, well, you don't, but you're getting right now. That is the number one answer to questions posed by the North Carolina Real Estate Commission. The number one answer is, it depends. Because every transaction is different. Everything is handled on a case-by-case scenario. I need you guys to consider this. Every property, every seller, and every buyer are different every time. And that makes for a unique transaction every single time. 30 years from now, you're still in real estate and you're doing a transaction, and I promise you, it's not like one you did before. They are all different. That's why we have stuff like, for example, pre-licensing to help build your foundation, help build that knowledge. Because even when you do 5 transactions, transaction number 6 is not going to look anything like the ones you've done before. If you like normal and consistency, you may be in the wrong place. If you like things switched up a bit, keep you on your toes, and you don't want to expect some days from day to day, welcome to real estate. It's the way it is. I often joke, the only thing consistent in this industry is change. That's it. That's the only thing consistent. It's change. So hang on to your hats, folks. Okay. So we need to define the duties that I owe my clients and my customers. Okay. We need to talk about first class versus coach, the warm towel versus the unsalted pretzels. So we're first going to talk about, can I talk about that later? We're first going to talk about the duties that we owe our clients. Okay, so y'all write this down, client duties. And the duties that I owe my clients, we can remember that by remembering old car. Some of you are on top of it. We're going to talk about each of these. But this is a summary of the duties that I owe my clients. I owe my client obedience, loyalty, disclosure, confidentiality, accounting, and reasonable skill, care, and diligence. And again, we're going to talk about each of these. Nice little breakdown. These are the duties that I owe my client. Y'all have that written down? Client duties. We will talk about customer after we talk about old car. So when we talk about old car, I owe my client obedience. I am to act in good faith at all times. I need to obey my principal's lawful instructions. Nobody can make me break the rules. And I'm not talking about police rules. I'm talking, well, they can't make me break police rules, but they also can't make me break license law and commission rule. There are certain duties that the North Carolina Real Estate Commission gives me that I've got to follow the Real Estate Commission's law and rules. My principal cannot make me violate my licensing board's laws and rules, and we will talk about them. I'm going to follow commands from my clients. I'm going to follow instructions that are within the confines of the law. Again, you guys, my job is to advise. My job is to provide information. My job is to help them gather facts. They are the ones that make the decision. Let's see. So principal and client can be used interchangeably. Yes. Principal and client are often used interchangeably, as I've probably already done. So the O in old car, says, I'm obedient. I follow my principal's lawful instructions. I'm acting in good faith at all times. The L in OCAR is loyalty. I'm going to be loyal to my principal. I'm going to place my principal's interest above all others, sometimes including my own. Again, I say, it ain't about you. Who's it about? It's about the principal. It's about the client. They hire you. They're the boss. We also need to be sensitive to conflicts of interest. This goes back to, and we'll build on this, we will talk more about this, but this goes back to, you know, if I have an interest in the property and my principal has an interest in the property, who may win? The principal, right? I can't go in and pit against my principal. I can't go in and try to compete against my principal. I got other examples of conflicts of interest, never fear. The principal's number one, I'm loyal to them. And I place their interest above all others. The D in OCAR is disclosure. I have a duty to keep my principal informed at all times about any facts that may influence their purchase or selling decision. This is the first, well, maybe not the first time, but this starts building on our conversation of material facts. Everything about material facts is in Unit 7. We may even get to this today. So we'll be able to start this. But I got to keep my principal informed. If I learn something, let's just say I represent the seller hired me. In some way, somehow I learned something about the buyer. If that information I learned about the buyer could affect my seller's decision to sell, I've got to share that with my seller. I can't keep secrets from my client. If it affects their decision to buy or sell, I can't keep secrets. I've got to disclose. I've got to share with them what I've learned. So let's break, we're going to spend a little bit of time on disclosure, on the D. So let's break this down and let's talk specifically about things that I have to disclose to my seller. I present all offers to my seller. Can I make the decision? Am I making the decision on who to sell my house? No, I present all offers. What about the low ball offer that's so low that's just going to make my seller mad? Do I have to present it to them? Yes. What about the offer to do, I don't know, 2-year lease to own? Do I have to present it to them? Yes. What offers do I present to my sellers? All offers. Every single one of them. Again, I'm not the one making a decision here. If somehow I find out that the buyer can purchase at a price higher than what they offered, I need to disclose that to my seller. Let's say, for example, you find out what the buyer is pre-approved for, and they make an offer lower than asking price. But you know the lender has approved them, pre-approved them to pay more. Could that affect if and how my seller counters that offer? If they're coming in with a low ball and I know darn well they can pay more than that, could that affect how my seller responds? Yeah. So if I find out, I also need to disclose to my seller, the seller that hires me, the buyer's intention to sell for a profit. So if I find out the buyer's going to buy the property and then turn around and sell it for profit, I need to share that with my seller so they can make that informed decision. I'm getting to dual agency. Everything changes with dual agency. And we're getting there. We're not there yet. Okay, so buyer's intention to sell for a profit, ability to purchase at a higher price than what they've offered, What about the buyer that hires me? What about my buyer client? I have a duty to disclose any known deficiencies. I'm going to let them know if I know of any problems with the home. Maybe the seller chooses to disclose problems with the home. I need to pass that on to my buyer. I also need to disclose to my buyer any facts that could adversely affect the property's value or desirability. Proposed zoning amendment, for example. Proposed road construction or highway, a planned highway. If you find out that DOT is going to widen the road, could that affect the buyer's decision to purchase or not? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. It's not for me to decide that. My job is to say, by the by, the proposal is on the table for DOT to widen this road. I'm disclosing that information. I'm disclosing that there's a zoning amendment on the table. And if passed, they could build a Starbucks and a Dollar General across the street. Would that be important to a buyer to know that there's a Dollar General coming? Sure. This is part of our duty to help the buyer learn. Y'all, buyers don't know all the places to go to find out this information. They don't know. They don't think to check DOT. They don't think to check zoning. That's why they hire us. If for some reason as the buyer's agent, I find out why the seller's selling, I need to share that with my buyer. Could that impact their decision? Well, maybe. If they're just selling because they want to, right? They don't need to. Wants and needs are two different things, yes? If they need to sell, there might be a more sense of urgency. They might be willing to take a lower price. If they just want to sell just for the sake of selling, then they may not need to let it go. Again, this is not a discussion of how I find information out. This is a discussion of once I find this stuff out. Doesn't matter how I learn it. What we're talking about is what do I do once I learn it? Questions on old. Obedience, loyal, and disclose. Boy, disclose. The class today is brought to you by the letter D, isn't it? We've been all about disclosing. The C in old car is confidentiality. There is certain information about the person that I cannot share without their permission. I cannot share certain information about the person. This is not about the property. We'll talk about the information that I share about the property in just a bit. But when it comes to confidentiality, there's certain information I can't disclose about the person without their permission. As a matter of fact, y'all add in principal written permission, because what do we document? Everything. I had sellers once, and they attempted to go for sale by owner first. So they were trying to sell it on their own for, I don't know, 5-6 months before they got frustrated and threw their hands up in the air and called me. So I went over, listed their house, got them on the market, got them advertised. This was a different market. If you're familiar with the real estate market today, this was before the market we're in now. And we were on the market for about, it wasn't even 2 weeks. 2 weeks. Again, not the market we're in today. We were listed for about 2 weeks, and she called me so dang frustrated. And I'm thinking, what's wrong with this woman? We've only been on the market for 2 weeks. What did she expect? Well, guys, I only had it listed for 2 weeks. She's been dealing with this for the last 6 months. So she was in a different place than I was, right? She'd been going at this a lot longer than me. So she told me, she said, all right, will you add in your public remarks the information that I can type in that goes out for everybody to see in like Zillow and Realtor.com and all those other good sites. Will you add in your public remarks that the seller, super highly motivated seller, super highly motivated? And I said, no, I'm not going to say that, but I will say that you're a motivated seller. Let's think this through. When I advertise to the public that this is a motivated seller, what am I telling the public? Bring me your offers. We might be able to accept something less than asking price. I mean, let's be honest. Aren't all sellers motivated? They got a dang for sale sign in their front yard. So aren't all sellers motivated? Sure, there's some reason they have a sign in their yard. But when you advertise they're a motivated seller, are you sharing something confidential about the seller? Are you telling the world, bring me crap and let's see if we can't work with it? That, and I said, I'm not going to put super highly motivated seller because we're not going to scream desperation, but I will put motivated seller in once you send me an email telling me it's okay to do it. So I got her written permission. I got her documentation. I now have an email. I swear, as soon as we hung up the phone, it says, I got an email from her. I was able to go in and add that. And probably a week later, we got an offer, so it worked. What I need you guys to understand, though, is I couldn't disclose that without her permission. I couldn't tell the world, we'll take something less than asking price without her permission. Do I have everybody? I got a couple questions. I'll address them in just a second. We tell our client everything about our customer. We tell our customer nothing about our client unless we have their permission. Read that again. We tell our client everything about the customer. We tell the customer nothing about the client. So let me pause. Let me go back and get some questions. I don't want to ignore anybody. Let's see. Will you teach us how to document all disclosures that we share? Kinda. Let me just say, to answer that, your firm will have policies. Once you join a firm, they'll have policies in place about where they want you to store stuff. Most firms are using electronic documents. So we have like .loop, DocuSign, zip forms, for example. So your firm will have some kind of, I don't know if anybody has a file cabinet, so, but if you join a firm with a file cabinet, they'll tell you they want you to put your disclosures and all your documentation. Does that answer, Latika?
Yes, thank you.
Good, yep. In the books, it says we can't disclose financial condition. How does that differ from disclosing that you know they are pre-approved for more than they're offering? And that's a good question. And one thing we're going to learn when we talk about material facts is that the principal's ability or inability to complete the transaction is something I have to disclose. So that's kind of an exception to the rule. So hang on to that. We may come back and we'll address that. If we find out that my buyer can't get loan approval, I have to disclose that to my seller. The seller has the right to know that they can't afford to buy their house. And that's the material fact that we're getting into. So how do we get away with sending a pre-approval letter? We're not saying this is how much you're approved for. We're just saying if I buy your house for X amount, a lender has pre-approved me. And that's pretty much what that pre-approval is in no way a guarantee, zero. We'll talk about that pre-approval letter when we get into 14 and 15 is our financing units. We get to wear a lender hat. So we'll talk more about that. So if a broker has confidential information about a prospective buyer and is working with the sellers, that undisclosed dual, I'm going to talk about dual. Y'all forget that you know about dual agency for right now. I promise you, we will get to dual agency. I will get to working with real estate agents and I will get to first substantial contact. Don't you get pre-approval before working with the client? I mean, yeah, that would be a good in practice, but there's no rule that says that I have to. So would that be the best thing to do? Well, yeah. Why are you putting buyers in your cars and wasting your time showing them property if you don't know they can afford it or not, right? So is that in good practice? I bet. I'm going to talk about the brochure. I promise. I promise. I will talk about agency disclosure, working with real estate agency brochure. We are getting there. Back to the duties that I owe my client. Okay, the C in OCAR is confidentiality. The A is accounting. I need to help my client account for all funds received from or on behalf of the principal. At some point in the transaction, it's a pretty safe bet that I may have somebody else's money in my hand. I'm responsible for that money. My job is acting as courier, and I'm delivering it from point A to point B. And when that person's money is in my hand, it is my responsibility. In Unit 21, we're going to go to closing. And one of the things we're going to do in Unit 21 is help our sellers calculate how much they're going to get from the sale, help our buyers figure out how much they have to bring to closing to purchase, and us helping them accounting for their funds on their closing statements is part of the duty that I owe my client. I also need to maintain accurate records. What do we document? Everything. License, law, and commission rule requires me to keep all records for at least 3 years. North Carolina Real Estate Commission expects me to keep all records for at least 3 years. Does that mean I can keep them longer for 3 years? Sure. 3 is the minimum. At least 3 years. The R, and actually it's break time, you guys don't want me to call it. So let's take a break. We come back, we'll talk about that R in old car. So let's take 10. Did you guys come back? I haven't scared you off yet, have I? Did you hear me say yet? Guys, please remember, you're not leaving this call today as an agency expert. How do you become an expert on agency? You review it, you go over it until you're sick and tired of hearing it, okay? Till you're sick and tired of reading it. And that's when you start wrapping your brain around it. I understand we're just being exposed to, and we're introducing a lot of concepts that's going to help us build up to future conversations. So please bear with me. Okay, there's a system, tried and true. All right, cameras are on. I am taking attendance. Oh, Will, you're really good at that. All right, I got you. Okay, I had a question come in. Yeah, I had a question come in under confidentiality. It states that the broker must disclose material facts about the condition of the property, even if the seller chooses not to disclose. Does that violate loyalty? No, because as we're going to learn when we talk about material facts, I always have a duty to disclose material facts. So that's one of those cases where I do whatever my principal tells me to within the confines of the law. So even if the seller says, don't you disclose, I always have a duty to disclose material facts. Particularly what we talk about with confidentiality is keeping, and I'm going to go back for 1 second so we can see this, about keeping the person's information confidential. This isn't about keeping the property's information confidential. Everybody with me? So we'll talk about the property's information when we talk about the material facts. But what the C&O car says is that I need to keep my client's information confidential unless I have their written permission. Okay. So then the A is accounting. So then the R is reasonable skill, care, and diligence. And what reasonable skill, care, and diligence says is that we should only do things that we can reasonably do. Just because I can doesn't always mean that I should. Can I hop on Interstate 85 this afternoon and drive 120 miles per hour? Sure. Should I? Probably not. Reasonable skill, care, and diligence says when I'm driving on the road, I should do things that I reasonably can. Let's bring this into real estate. Remember we said the other day that your North Carolina real estate license says that you can brokerage a deal in any property that's located in the state of North Carolina. Your license is good for the whole state. Reasonable skill, care, and diligence says maybe you shouldn't focus from Murphy to Manio. Maybe you should hone in on a certain area. May that be the city, the county, the triad, the triangle, for example. What about, I'll tell you guys, my personal experience is all residential. I know very, very little about commercial. So when my friend calls me and wants to buy or sell a commercial property, does reasonable skill, care, and diligence say I should just jump right in and do it without getting any knowledge or training or expertise or learning anything about it? Reasonable skill, care, and diligence says that wouldn't be in the person's best interest. So we only need to do the things that we should. Now, I'm saying I can do a commercial transaction, but I also said in order to do it, I need to learn about it. I need to grasp how commercial works. In that scenario, I may be best to refer my friend to a commercial agent. Would I get paid a referral fee? Well, there's a really good chance. But as far as me jumping in blind and doing it, whose best interest do I have in that scenario? Do I have my friend's best interest? No, I'm thinking about the dollar signs, aren't I? I'm like, well, if I help them buy this big commercial property, this is how much I'm going to make. And again, I'm telling you guys, this isn't about me. This is about them. And that's what reasonable skill, care, and diligence says. Guys, real estate, and we're going to talk about reasonable skill, care, and diligence a little bit more. real estate is a people industry. If you're coming into this industry led by dollar signs, there may be some challenges. If you're coming into this industry to work with the people and make money from that, then that's different. You got to have the people first. But if you're coming into this going, I'm going to make lots and lots of money, trust me, if you take good care of the people, the money will follow. You got to have those priorities straight. You got to have those priorities in line. And that's what reasonable skill, care, and diligence tells us. You get your very first client. You guys get your license and you get your very first client, and you take really good care of that client and you do everything right. If you do everything right, that client is going to tell their family and friends, and they're going to tell their family and friends, and they're going to tell their family and friends. You guys with me? And that's how you grow your business. Do you know what one negative Google review can do to your career? Do you know what one negative? We know reviews, but do you guys with me? We got to take care of the people. And I'm telling you, when you take care of the people, the money will follow. Question comes in, so we can disclose why the seller is selling only if I have their written permission. Can I tell the public why the seller is selling? Only if I have their written permission, because that's something confidential about the person. Okay. So reasonable skill, care, and diligence says I should only be doing the things that I can reasonably do. Particularly, let's break down reasonable skill, care, and diligence that we would owe to our seller. I owe it to my seller to help them come up with an appropriate listing price. When the seller looks at you and says, how much should I sell my house for? Don't just blurt a number out. That's part of the research we're going to do. We're going to talk about helping the sellers find a reasonable price in Unit 8. Reasonable skill, care, and diligence in my seller says I'm going to help them find any facts about the buyer that would aid in their decision to sell. Any information about the buyer, again, I tell my client everything about my customer. I tell my customer nothing about my client. I'm advertising the property, marketing the property and getting it out in all the sources is not just internet advertising. Not everybody relies on the internet. So what are all the platforms? What are all the places that we can promote the property? Maybe doing an open house, if that's convenient. How can we help the seller advertise? And then when that offer comes in, I'm going to help my seller translate the terms. As of July 1st, our standard offer to purchase and contract is now 16 pages. We grew a page. On June 30th, it was 15 pages. On July 1st, it was 16. So we get to Unit 10, we'll look at our sales contract. Seller's not sitting down and reading that 16-page offer to purchase and contract. Buyer's not either. That's why we need to help them understand the terms, help explain the terms to them. Reasonable skill, care, and diligence owed to the buyer. Now the buyer's not asking you how much they should list it for, are they? They're asking you, how much should I offer? When they walk in the front door and they say, oh my God, this is the one, this is my dream house, let's write it up. Then they're going to look at you and say, how much should I offer? Again, you guys, we're not just going to blurt a number out there. We're going to do some research. We're going to help them come up with a reasonable offer price. We'll talk about that in Unit 8. I'm going to help my buyer locate and see suitable properties. This starts by having a conversation with the buyer. What are you looking for? Where do you want to live? Is there anything in particular? I always tell my buyers, whether they do it or not, I don't know, but I always tell my buyers when they first start thinking about this process, we're going old school, take a piece of paper, draw the line down the middle of it. One side are your wants, another side is your needs. Are wants and needs two different things? Absolutely. So helping the buyer identify those wants and needs. helping the buyer realize. I often, it blows my mind when you're working with a married couple and you ask that married couple what they're looking for. I swear sometimes they are describing two totally different houses. He wants this, this, and that. And she wants this and this. And our question is, my God, how do I get them under the same roof? Because they are discussing two totally different things. That tells me I got to get them on board. I got to get them together, right? So that wants and needs, helping them identify what it is that they want. I'm going to help my buyer secure financing. Some buyers are cash buyers, good for them. The rest of us have to get a loan. So we're going to help them connect with a lender, get that pre-approval letter, get that financing. And then when they find the one, I'm going to write an offer up on their behalf, and I'm going to present their offer for them. And when I present my buyer's offer, I'm going to make it seem like the best offer out there. Why? Because it's my buyer's offer. I can't tell you guys how many times as the listing agent, I've had a buyer's agent call me going, I got to send you this offer. I'm so sorry. I know what you're going to say, but I got to present it anyway. Is that representing your buyer when you act like you're ashamed of this offer? How does that look? How is that doing what's best for your buyer? So when we present a buy offer, no matter how low ball it is, we present it because it's our buyer's offer. It's what they're willing to offer. You never know how the seller's going to respond. Never, ever know how the seller's going to respond. Trina, your camera's not on, but I see you chatting. Should we ask them what are their non-negotiables? Sure, sure. Have them think about everything. Couple different things. Ooh, look at all those cameras pop on now. Yeah, I'll look. Make sure your camera's on, please. Feel like I need to take attendance again on this last page. All right, I got you. I got you. Okay. But we need to help. Again, you guys, some people know what they want. Some people just want to buy a house. We need to help get them all. And they may not be able to find everything on their needs list. So we may have to say, okay, in this market, we're not going to find these. I got you. In this market, we're not going to find this, or in this area. Well, I want a 5-bedroom house on 5 acres a lot with a 5-car garage for under $200,000. Good luck with that. Call me when you find it, right? We can help bring that reality to it. Why? Because we're the experts of our market. We're familiar with the market. We know what's going on day to day. When it comes to reasonable skill, care, and diligence owed to both buyer and seller, this is where we need to be experts of our market. We need to stay on top of current laws, zoning, roads, even real estate market conditions. This is not the market for buyers to try to make lowball offers. I mean, they can, but they're not going to go far. That pendulum will swing back. We'll go from being in a seller's market to a buyer's market, and now we can make lowball offers. But with us being the experts of the market, the experts of the industry, we can help prepare them for what to expect. I cannot control the real estate market. I cannot control the housing prices right now. I cannot control the high fees, the low inventory, the low interest rates. I have zero control over that. But what I can do is educate my clients about what is currently going on. Is everybody good? Hear what I'm saying? Those agents that do not properly handle reasonable skill, care, and diligence often get themselves in trouble with the real estate commission and possibly even the courts. We could be found guilty of negligence or misconduct. We could be held liable for any damages. If our principal acts based off of our false or incorrect information, we could be held liable for that. If you think lying is the way to go, you may forfeit your commission. The courts may rule that you acted maliciously and you could lose your commission. And by the way, any violation of license, law, and commission rule, LL and CR, this is the North Carolina Real Estate Commission. And any violation of license, law, and commission rule could also be a violation of your license. They regulate and control your license. We'll talk about disciplinary action. I think it's the end of this unit. I think it's the end of unit, but we'll talk about it in the next couple weeks. So with reasonable skill, care, and diligence, Colin is a buyer's agent. He gets a request from his buyer to see a property that is 200 miles outside of the geographical area that he normally provides services. The question is, can Colin show this buyer the property? Can he? Can he? Well, as long as it's in North Carolina, sure. The next question is, should he? And that's where it depends. Can he drive 200 miles to show this property? Sure. But is Colin familiar with that market? Is Colin familiar with that area? Is Colin willing to make that drive every time his buyer wants to get in the house? Is he willing to drive back and forth 200 miles when we want to meet the home inspector or we want to go back and look at paint samples? These are questions that Colin has to ask himself before he agrees to this. And if he decides, I mean, gas prices are looking a little better, but they're still not great, right? So if Colin decides that it's just not financially feasible for him to drive 200 miles outside of the area that he works, he can refer it to an agent down there. This is the beauty of referral fees. I can still get Colin some money. I'm telling you guys, referral fees is the easiest money you'll ever have to make. Colin says, Bob, this is my buyer. Bob, buyer, this is Bob. And then Colin collects a referral fee. So Colin's got to ask himself, do I want to make more money by driving 200 miles or do I want to refer it and let Bob, the expert of that market, handle it? That's what reasonable skill, care, and diligence says. Because it's not about Colin. It's not about Bob. It's about the buyer. It's about the principal. What if they're set on working with you and don't want to work with another agent? Again, that's up to Colin. Colin may have to look at that buyer and be like, thank you. I appreciate that. That means a whole lot to me, but I can't assist you properly. Colin may just have to have that conversation. Again, everybody understand, we like to get a little defensive right here. I'm not saying Colin can't. If the property is located in North Carolina, he can. I'm just suggesting that Colin think about if that's offering his buyer reasonable skill, care, and diligence. Is it worth it to Colin? Everybody good? So we owe our clients OCAR. What do we owe our clients? OCAR. That's that first class service. Trina, ding, 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 ding. You guys are all over the state right now, aren't you? The client gets OCAR. So what does the customer get? Remember, the client's represented, the customer is not. So if the client gets OCAR, the customer still gets a level of service. Remember, they're still in the plane. My job is still to get them from point A to point B, but I don't owe them OCAR. I only owe you OCAR if you decide to hire me. So if you don't hire me, you're my customer. As my customer, what do you get? Well, I have to be honest. I have to treat you fairly. And I always have a duty to disclose material facts. I'm going to say that again. I always have a duty to disclose material facts. I owe the disclosure of material facts about a property to both client and customer. If I may rephrase that, I never have a reason not to disclose material facts. We always have a duty to disclose material facts. It doesn't matter what my role is, and it doesn't matter who you are. I owe you the disclosure of material facts. And that's where we're working on heading next. When it comes to customers, a lot of customers are relying on our advertising. So if you have a property, you put it in the multiple listing services. We'll talk about the MLS in Unit 8. But once you put a property in the MLS, from there, it is fed to thousands, and I'm not kidding when I say that, thousands of websites. So anybody in the world can see your property on a cajillion websites listed at 123 Main Street. And we need to be very careful because that's our communication to everybody, right? To the consumer everywhere. And so we need to make sure that when we're advertising to customers, to consumers, that we're not lying in our advertising. I mean, they're stretching the truth, right? And then there's a flat out lie. One term that we have when it comes to our advertising is called puffing. Puffing is taking an opinion and exaggerating. Puffing is kind of using, have you guys ever read remarks and you've seen a whole bunch of adjectives used to try to paint a pretty picture about the property? We're trying to describe the property using fancy words, and that's puffing. And puffing is okay as long as it's not a misrepresentation. Misrepresentation is a flat out lie. Puffing is your opinion. Absolutely, Sydney. This is the best house on the block. That's puffing because that's your opinion. Could somebody else show up and say another house on the block is the best house on the block? That's their opinion. So puffing is okay. Lying is not. Let's say, for example, we're down here at the coast. Let's say, for example, you are listing this piece of land. No, I'm sorry, you're not listing this piece of land. Let me rephrase that. Let me say, for example, you are listing this property. I need to be very careful how I advertise that. Can I say ocean view? Probably, but what happens when this person, the owner of this lot, decides to build a house? Now, do you have an ocean view? Not anymore. So these are the kind of things that we need to be careful. I would not say ocean view. I would say great view of the ocean. Because if they come up tomorrow and build the house, you guys see what I'm saying? We can exaggerate, but we can't lie. Y'all, we never have a reason to lie. Okay, so any statements of fact have got to be accurate. We can use fancy adjectives and fancy words to help describe the property, but just make sure it doesn't cross that line into a flat out lie, into a misrepresentation. There you go, just steps away from the ocean. But if the lot in front of them actually builds, they could list, that's right. If you build on this lot, and you sell this, now you could say ocean view, right? Because nobody's going to come build here. I'm talking about advertising this property. Okay.
Julie, really quick. I forget what the term was we talked about the other day, but let's say you're listing a house and they ended up putting in a half bath, but they didn't get permits for it. When you're listing the house, would puffing, like, would you actually include that, even though on the county's records, it's listed as a 2-bath instead of a 2.5 bath? Would you actually put in there that there is a half bath? Or would that be considered puffing or what?
It depends, doesn't
Okay.
it? It depends. What we talked about the other day was an unpermitted space.
Right,
So if
that's
they
right.
did that half bath, if the county doesn't know about it, then it was probably unpermitted space, which means they added that half bath without pulling permits. And I can advertise a 2.5 bath, but I have to disclose that that half bath was unpermitted space. So
Okay.
how would I advertise that half bath? Honestly, it would just depend, because, you know, again, if the county doesn't know about it, there's a really safe assumption here that the permits weren't pulled. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Because if the county knows about it, they want money on that half bath. Yes, that's going to affect your taxes. That's what they're looking at there. Okay. Puffing. And I'll tell you guys what else too. For those of you that spend time looking on websites of various homes for sale, there's some talented photographers out there, aren't there? There are some talented photographers. And you guys are going to see some pictures and you're going to roll up to the house and you're going to be like, is that the same house? It looks nothing like it. They're finding just the right angle, just the right place. They're trying to make their pictures look good. And then you roll up, that's called curb appeal, right? And then you roll up and you're like, well, golly, where the heck were they standing when they saw this place? Or when they took these pictures? Again, we can glorify, we can exaggerate our opinions. We just can't lie. All right, long awaited. Yes.
Can I ask another question? I'm
Please.
sorry. I just moved to North Carolina from Washington
Welcome.
State. Thank you. And I ran into, when I was there, because I just love looking at houses, so I would go look. One of my realtor friends said that he went in to show a client a home, and when they got in there, it was nothing like what was listed in the pictures. And when he asked the other realtor about it, it was, well, this was prior, these pictures were prior to the last person that was in it, or before the owner passed, or
Right.
what have you. You know, since then they've had this and this and this happen. Maybe it was busted pipes or whatever. How does that work here?
I think in practice, when major work is done, when things in the house don't look like they are now, I think in practice is go take new pictures, right? Now, you know, because I mean, you know, you could just put in one picture. You don't have to put in 50, you know, but you could just put in, you know, but if you do, you know, renovations or something changes, something happens, I think best practice would be to go to take new pictures. So you have a true representation of what the property looks like today. From my experience, when we walk in the front door and it doesn't look anything like what we saw online, we generally turn around and walk right back out, because my buyers are like, this is not why I'm here. Why I'm here is because what I saw online. I'm telling you guys, it all changes when you walk in the front door. You never know what you're going to expect walking into somebody else's home. We'll just leave that at that for now. All sorts
I
of
have
fun
another
things.
question. I'm sorry.
Please. Is this on topic?
Yes. Well,
Okay.
yes. As far as like Zillow and all of those places are concerned, when you're looking at properties just like that, I have run into situations where the information that's on there may not be the most accurate. Like it's still listed. It doesn't say that it was sold. What's the most accurate?
MLS. Here's the
Okay.
deal. Zillow and Realtor.com are third-party sites. Again, you put it in MLS and then it feeds to thousands of sites. Think of with Zillow, it's like a copy of a copy, right? You just don't have. And so the information is only as good as provided. As long as it's right in MLS, that's all we can do. Zillow may use different verbiage than what some MLSs may use. So that's why it may not seem to match up. Again, best practice, have an agent that can connect you with some secondary websites where it's just a copy. It's not a copy of a copy. That makes sense. So there's definitely something to be said for that accuracy. But the most accurate is going to be what we have access to, less, and what you will have access to once you get your license and you start working with those buyers. We had another good reason to hire me, right? Because I have access to the current.
I've also noticed that on Zillow, when they have like a Zestimate,
Yeah,
sometimes it's very far off.
we're going to talk about Zestimates actually
Okay.
in Unit 17. So,
Okay,
and you know
perfect.
what I know about those? Like you said, yeah,
Okay,
those are not reliable. Let's just leave it at that for now. We'll talk about those. All right. So we've been building up to it. We need to have now a conversation about material facts. Y'all, please, you don't need to write this down. This is at the top of page 143. The actual term of material facts is a very broad definition. The broad definition of a material fact is a fact that a reasonable person would recognize as relevant to a decision to be made. That's not real helpful, is it? So what the North Carolina Real Estate Commission did was broke that broad definition down into particulars, into specifics, into specifically things that are considered material facts. Examples of material facts are facts about the property itself. Facts about the property itself is going to be physical characteristics about the property, structural defects, the roof leaks, termite infestation. Facts about the property itself. A material fact is also considered facts relating directly to the property. Anything that could affect value. A proposed zoning amendment would be a fact relating directly to the property. A planned highway construction would be a fact relating directly to the property. Remember all that stuff we've done in the first couple of units? Zoning, highways, that kind of thing. That's why we're doing that, because I have a duty to disclose that. A material fact is a fact relating directly to the ability of the agent's principal to complete the transaction. What? Any fact, anytime you find out that your principal is unable to close, that is a material fact that we have to disclose. Usually this third bullet point revolves around money. If you're working with buyers and you find out once we go under contract that the buyer's not going to get loan approval, the lender has denied them a loan, that is a material fact. We have to disclose that to the seller. If you're working with sellers and you find out once you've listed the property that the seller is in foreclosure or in bankruptcy, that may affect their ability to sell, right? If they're going to lose the property to the bank, it's no longer theirs to sell. So any fact about the ability, or actually let's say the inability of the principal to complete the transaction. And then this last one that's kind of separate, facts known to be of specific importance to a buyer. What have I been saying? If it's important to my buyer, then it's important to me. So when my buyer tells me I need a house that blah, 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 that now becomes a material fact to me. Now, that doesn't mean I need to run around disclosing it to everybody, right? But that becomes a material fact to me. Once they share something of importance to me, then I now have a duty to make sure that their end use is allowed. So let's talk a little bit more about facts about the property itself. I can only disclose what I know. Remember our little red flags? When you're meeting with the seller for the first time or the second time or the fifth time, we always need to be looking out for little red flags. Now, let's have a conversation about this. Remember caveat emptor? And we said with caveat emptor, the seller doesn't have to disclose. They don't have to tell you if the roof leaks. They don't have to tell you if there's a major crack in the foundation. The seller's not held to the North Carolina Real Estate Commission's license law and commission rule. So the seller doesn't have to disclose. However, once you and I learn a material fact about the property, we do have to disclose. Can we see a major conflict between agent and seller? Can we hear it? The seller looks at you and says, the roof leaks. Shh, don't tell anybody. Well, remember what obedience says. I followed their lawful instructions. Is it lawful for me to hide the fact that the roof leaks? I can't. Why? Because my licensing board says that I have to disclose that. Once I learn about a material fact, I have to disclose it. Guys, I'm telling you, once you see it, you can't unsee it. Once you hear it, you can't unhear it. Once you learn about it, you can't undo it. So early, very early in the relationship, we're going to have to explain this to our sellers. You don't have a duty to disclose, but I do. Let them know up front so you're not blindsiding them, right? You're not snowballing them into thinking, well, I'm going to tell the roof leaks, and that they need to understand very early that whatever you tell me, material fact about the property itself, old car goes out the window, doesn't it? Because I always have a duty to disclose material facts. The seller can choose. I don't have an option. So I explain this to my seller. We have this conversation. We're going through the house and we're looking at things. Maybe at that point, they keep their mouth shut. Maybe they share things with me. Maybe I can look at things and say, wow, that's a pretty big water stain on the ceiling. What happened there? If I see something, if my little red flag goes up and I see something, I'm required to ask questions. I can't just turn a blind eye to that water stain on the ceiling. When I see it, I've got to ask questions. How did that get there? There's a leak from somewhere. Is there a bathroom on the second floor right above it? Is there a roof leak? Having these conversations up front with the sellers is crucial. Next week, we're going to talk about our disclosure, our agency disclosure, and the importance and the necessity of defining our agency relationship, defining what we do or do not have to do up front early. The seller needs to know at the very beginning that while they don't have to disclose, I do. When it comes to material facts, there's no possible way for me to know everything. I cannot disclose what I don't know. So what about things that aren't obvious? What about things that aren't hidden? Those are referred to as latent defects. And I'm getting ready to spell it for you so you can see it. Latent defects. L-A-T-E-N-T. Is that right? Yes. Latent defects. I do math, I don't spell. Latent defects are hidden. They're not obvious. I can't walk into a room and see it and go, ooh, what's that? I can't be responsible for things I don't know, right? I only have a duty to disclose things that I should reasonably know. I gotta ask questions. If I see something and my little red flag goes up, I have to ask questions. We have a duty to discover and disclose. Again, I cannot turn a blind eye to the water stain on the ceiling. Now, understand, my role is to disclose. I'm not a plumber. I don't know. Did leak from the roof. I don't know. I'm not a roofer. I'm not a plumber, right? I'm staying in my lane. I'm just saying, ooh, look, there's a water stain on the ceiling. I'm disclosing that it's there. What I'm with on my buyer. And I say, hey, look, there's a water stain. And my buyer says, where'd that come from? Can I answer that question? Probably not. So what do I need to do? Advise my buyer to talk to a roofer or a plumber. Let's get to the bottom of this. Is this starting to make sense? My job is to disclose. But that doesn't change who I am. I'm just an agent. I'm not a general contractor. I'm not an electrician. I'm not a plumber. Unless you are. I'm not. So let me go back. I got some questions flying through chat. So let me go back and see what we've missed. What if they do not give us permission to disclose that information? We have to disclose it anyway. I always have a duty to disclose material facts. I tell my seller, these are your rights. You don't have to, but I do because I'm bound by license law and commission rule. Do you need to tell a seller that you have to disclose that? Absolutely. And isn't that fair to my seller to tell them early? Otherwise, we're going through the house and they're going, this is wrong and that's broken. This doesn't work. And I'm going, oh, by the way, I have to disclose all that. Do I have a happy seller? Probably not. So we're being upfront. We're being honest, you guys. We're being upfront. Competitive listing appointments are a very real thing, which means the seller may be talking to 2 or 3 different agents and deciding who they want to hire. So let's say you're one of those 3 agents that the seller is interviewing, and you neglect to tell them your duty to disclose. And they go through the house and say, this is broken, that doesn't work, and da-da-da-da-da, and that never worked since we moved in, you know, blah, 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 blah. And then they have the nerve to hire somebody else. And now let's pretend that once the property is marketed, listed, you bring your buyer client. Don't you now have a whole laundry list of problems? You say, like, I got to tell you this and that and everything else. And the seller's going, whoa, whoa, whoa. One thing that we're going to do that we're going to learn next week, and we're going to do with our agency disclosure, is let all consumers know, everybody, I don't owe you confidentiality until you decide to hire me. So if you tell me why you're selling, what your motive is, what price you're willing to accept, and then you choose not to hire me, I don't owe you that confidentiality. The point I'm making for now, we will talk more about it next week, but the point I'm making for now is, isn't it fair to the consumer that we're upfront early? Don't we need to let them stuff, you know, hi, my name is Julie. I have to disclose. I don't owe you confidentiality until you hire me. We need to get this information out before they start sharing stuff with us. We'll talk more about the process working with buyers and sellers once we get into Unit 8. But when the seller is pointing out defects in the house, they should know my role. They should know that I have to disclose irregardless of caveat emptor. They're the only ones that can get away with caveat emptor, not me. It doesn't matter. You will have to disclose this information. That's right. How would you gain their trust and learn about the nuances about the house or the property? Gaining the trust is huge, right? And that becomes, I mean, that's something, that's a big part of it. Again, we'll talk a little bit more about that disclosure and how when I'm walking in the front door, I'm letting them know up front, this is who I am. This is where I stand. This is my role in this transaction, in this relationship. We got to be upfront with people. Don't wait for them to blurt something out and say, oh, by the way, I got to tell everybody that. That's how you lose their trust, right? It takes time to gain trust, but it lose trust just like that, can't you? It takes nothing to lose trust. Just so long as it pertains to the house, not the seller, that's right. Liz pendants be discovered by the seller's agent prior to property being put on the market? No, well, I mean, the attorney, that may be something that the attorney may find, but we could ask some, I'd rather ask some questions on that one, I think. Do you take pictures of those defects? Hey, pictures say 1,000 words, don't they? So if you see a defect, I mean, guys, this thing is tethered to us anyway, right? So when you see something, snap a picture of it, take a picture of it. Now, I'm not going to advertise it. I'm not going to put it in my MLS. Be like, attention all buyers, here's the water stain on the ceiling, right? I'm not going to do that. But what do we document? We document everything. And isn't taking pictures with date and time stamp a form of documentation? Absolutely. So when you find out something is wrong with the house, it is the seller's job to fix before listing. No, sellers don't have to repair anything. We can make suggestions. I can say, wow, it could sell faster and I could get you more money if you fix this, this, and this. But again, remember caveat emptor? The seller doesn't have to fix anything. Everything is sold as is. Can I make suggestions? Of course I can. You know, paint your front door a big bold color, make it pop. That's just a suggestion. Do you have to do it? No, but I can offer suggestions on making your property more sellable. I like that. A customer is a friend and a client is a best friend. Thank you. You just helped fuel my future pre-licensing class. The customer is your friend. We don't want to hurt our friends, do I? But who do I owe my loyalty? That's to my bestie. I like that. Thank you. Do I need written permission to take photos of the inside and outside of the house? Yes. And I get that in our listing agreement that we will look at in Unit 8. Do I ever get customers who disclose that they're looking for an agent who will take the least amount of commission when interviewed? Oh, yeah. Yeah, y'all, they don't want to pay us. That's their second question is, are you willing to reduce your commission? Once again, we will talk all about commission in Unit 8 and how that works. And how you answer, because you need to be prepared for that question of, will you reduce your commission? Because as sure as I stand here in front of you, they will ask you that. How much do you charge? And are you willing to reduce that? So we will talk about your commission in Unit 8. Did I get everything? If I missed something, please let me know. You guys remember, we're not done yet, but also please remember I'm around all weekend. So if you have particular questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. If any of you are sitting there going, gee, I don't want to bother Julie. This is what I do. This is my job. Bother me. Ask me questions. Let me help you. But guys, I can't help you if I don't know. I'm good, but I'm not a mind reader and I don't have a crystal ball. So let me help you. Reach out to me. Fair enough? All right. So let's look particularly at an example. Sarah's a listing agent. She's performing a listing presentation for Mark. During Sarah's walkthrough on the property, she notices a stain on the ceiling. She asks Mark about the stain. Mark says that the roof is leaked. He's been repaired it 3 times, but it needs to be replaced. And then Mark goes on to say that that's one of the reasons why he wants to sell. Then he says he tells Sarah not to mention this to prospective buyers because he will repaint the ceiling before Sarah lists. Mark's not in the wrong here, even though Mark sounds shady, right? I've tried to fix the roof. I just decided it's cheaper to sell this house than it is to put a new roof on it. Isn't Sarah in the wrong here? Shouldn't Sarah have had this conversation with Mark before he just started spilling all this information? And that's what we need to do. That's why we have our agency disclosure. This is why we're upfront. And again, our agency disclosures at the end of this unit. So we'll talk a little bit more about that next week. If you guys will please look with me on page 143. You guys see those bullet points where we define the material facts? And then that paragraph afterwards is a VIP. There are some things that have been declared to be a material fact by the North Carolina Real Estate Commission. What I mean by this is you don't have to stop and ask yourself, is that a material fact? Should I disclose that? These are certain things that have been declared a material fact that you shouldn't have to question if they're a material fact. We're telling you that they are. So first off, if a residence has ever been clad an exterior insulating and finishing system commonly called EIFS or synthetic stucco. exterior siding known as ephes is like, it looks like concrete. When I see ephes or synthetic stucco, it looks like Spanish style houses. You know what I'm talking about? It's real rough. Stucco is the siding. Synthetic is fake stucco. And the problem with the ephes or the synthetic stucco is it's highly likely for leaks, for water to get back there and get trapped, which sounds to me like a good source for mold, right? So whether or not a house has ever been clad in synthetic stucco is always a material fact, even if it's been addressed and repaired. Once it's been discovered that it's synthetic stucco, it remains a material fact on the property forever. If you're listing a home with stucco, we got to ask some questions. The best way to tell if it's synthetic or not, if it's real or not, is knock on it. Have you ever, if you have it, you can do so in a couple minutes. Run outside and knock on your driveway or your sidewalk. Knock on concrete. It's good and solid, isn't it? If that sidewalk was fake, it would be hollow. So if you ever want to know if it's real or not, you just go knock on it. Tell your seller, excuse me for a second, I'm going to go knock on the side of your house. But we need to ask questions. And if we find that it was ever clad in synthetic stucco, that will remain a material fact forever. Something else that'll always be a material fact is if the building has ever had leaking polybutylene pipes. Polybutylene pipes it's just a cheap product. It looks like plastic. And the problem with these pipes is they're gonna leak after a while. The old joke is if they haven't leaked yet, they will. So what the material fact is once they have leaked. If they've ever leaked, and even if they've been replaced, they still leak. It's not a material fact though until they leak. And the other thing in here is if the property was ever the site of a meth lab, that will always be a material fact. You never have to stand there and question if you have to disclose that or not. If it's ever been the site of a meth lab, that will always be a material fact. And I see some of you laughing and I see some of you question marks. And this is the common response for talking about meth labs and pre-licensing. I have an article from the Real Estate Commission about listing meth labs in Learn Test Pass. So you guys can go into Learn Test Pass this weekend in the Unit 7 material and see specifically what the Real Estate Commission says about listing a property that was once the site of a meth lab. How do we know that? Was it news? Is it well known? Did it hit the paper? Do we ask questions? I mean, I myself have never personally smelled meth, but it's to my understanding, it has a distinct smell to it. And when you walk into a house and you have a distinct smell, we need to ask some questions. Yep. What is that? So sometimes we just have to straight up ask questions. All right, let me go back in the chat. Oh, synthetic stucco, that's right. Will says you can almost punch through it. Yeah, it's like, it's cheap. It's cheap, it's fake. What if it once had said ephes, but it was replaced? Well, as I said, even if it's replaced, it will always be a material fact. Once it has had that synthetic, it will always be a material fact. What is the maximum amount of help we can offer a customer before they decide to hire? That is a great question. We will address that more on, next week. On Tuesday. Yeah. Somebody says the meth lab, it probably smells like a nail salon. Thank you. So if you walk in the front door of somebody's house and it smells like a nail salon, you don't see a nail salon, little red flag goes up, right? And what's that little red flag tell us? Ask questions, investigate, learn more. All right. Is anything possible? Welcome to the wild and wonderful world of real estate, because anything is possible. All right, so when do we meet again? On Tuesday, we're going to pick up bottom page 143. We're going to start talking about prohibited conduct. These are the prohibited misconducts that revolve around material facts. So how do we mishandle material facts? We're going to start talking about that. We will spend most of Tuesday in Unit 7. I will be shocked if we get through Unit 7 on Tuesday. So Tuesday is all about Unit 7. Please, please, please look ahead. And then on Thursday, we'll wrap up 7 and then get started on 8. So once again, you guys, please don't hesitate to reach out to me if you have any questions, if there's anything I can do to help. That's why I'm here. You know, I gave you my phone number. I gave you my email, just shy of giving you my address and let you come over tonight for dinner. Let me help. By the way, we're doing pork barbecue sliders, if anybody's now, I'm just kidding. So let me help, okay? You guys have a great weekend. I will see everybody on Tuesday. We are going to get further into the throes of agency, and it will be a good time, I promise. Okay, thank you guys.